High atop the snow-wreathed peaks of Mount Olympus, concealed behind veils of eternal mist and the whispers of the wind, lies one of the most extraordinary and symbolically rich narratives in the entire pantheon of Greek mythology: the birth of Athena, the grey-eyed goddess of wisdom and war. This origin story is far more than a simple chronicle of existence. It is an enchanted tapestry woven from the complex webs of divine politics, the hushed murmurs of ancient prophecies, and the primal terrors that could rob even the king of the gods of his slumber. To truly grasp the miraculous circumstances surrounding Athena's arrival into the mortal and immortal realms, we must journey backward against the currents of time, turning our gaze first to the primordial bond between Zeus and Metis, the Titaness of wisdom and cunning intelligence. Metis, whose very name translates to wise counsel or cunning, stood as one of the most intellectually potent beings among the lineage of the Titans. The ancient scrolls and dusty tomes describe her as a being possessed of unparalleled strategic foresight, a shapeshifter capable of assuming 1,000 different forms. These eldritch gifts made her an ally beyond price, yet also a potential adversary of terrifying capability. In the cataclysmic war known as the Titanomachy, that cosmic struggle between the old order of Titans and the rising Olympians, Metis played a role that was nothing short of vital to Zeus's ultimate triumph. It was she, in her infinite cleverness, who crafted and presented the enchanted elixir to Zeus, the very draught that forced the tyrant Kronos to regurgitate the children he had swallowed whole. This alliance, forged in the fires of rebellion, naturally evolved into a romantic union between two divine entities. Zeus beheld Metis not merely as a powerful confederate, but as a mental equal, a partner whose profound wisdom perfectly complemented his own raw, thunderous power. Yet this union between the Lord of the Sky and the Lady of Thought was doomed to exist under the ominous shadow of a dark prophecy, one capable of altering the very course of divine history. The Moirai, those ancient weavers of fate whose decrees even Zeus dared not ignore, whispered a warning that struck at the deepest insecurities of the King of Gods. The prophecy was stark and terrifying. Metis was destined to bear 2 children. The first would be a daughter of extraordinary wisdom and martial prowess. The second would be a son, a male heir whose intellect and strength would eclipse even that of Zeus himself, leading inevitably to the dethronement of the Olympian ruler. For Zeus, this prophecy carried a weight far heavier than mere words. It echoed the bloody history of his own lineage. He had ascended to the throne by overthrowing his father, Kronos, just as Kronos had cast down his own father, Uranus. It seemed to be a curse woven into the very fabric of divine succession, a cycle of patricide and conflict destined to repeat for generations. The prospect of suffering his father's fate, of being cast down from the high seat of power by his own flesh and blood, filled Zeus with a paranoid dread that chilled his ichor. Driven by this existential fear, he resolved to take the most drastic of measures. His solution was as ruthless as it was cunning, inspired by the savage tactics of his father Kronos, but refined with a critical, horrifying twist. Zeus decided that he would swallow Metis while she was pregnant with their first child. Unlike Kronos, who waited for the children to be born, Zeus chose a preemptive strike, believing that by consuming both the mother and the unborn progeny, he could forestall the prophecy forever, and simultaneously absorb Metis's vast oceanic wisdom into his own being. This act of consumption was not achieved through brute force, but through a delicate and treacherous ruse. Utilizing his legendary charm and exploiting the trust Metis placed in him, Zeus challenged her to a contest of shape-shifting. As Metis displayed her powers, transforming into creatures great and small, she eventually diminished her form into that of a humble fly, or as some ancient sources suggest, a single, shimmering drop of water. In that moment of vulnerability, Zeus seized his chance and swallowed her whole. While the ancient texts vary in the minutiae of the event, they all agree on the calculated nature of Zeus's betrayal and the absolute shock of Metis, who remained blissfully unaware of her husband's dark intent until the darkness claimed her. Following the ingestion of Metis, Zeus believed he had successfully parried the thrust of fate. However, the unborn child within Metis' womb did not cease to grow. Instead of developing within a traditional womb, the child began to gestate within the very mind of Zeus, growing inside his head. This unprecedented situation created a unique set of circumstances that would define not only Athena's birth, but her essential nature. The child flourished within the cranium of the king of gods, nourished by the divine essence of both parents, evolving at the very centre of Zeus's consciousness and decision-making faculties. As the pregnancy advanced, Zeus began to suffer from headaches of such increasing violence that no divine remedy could soothe them. The ancient chroniclers describe this agony as unbearable, as though Zeus's head were being cleaved apart by the pressure building from within. The pain became so excruciating that it began to impair his ability to rule and judge, causing great alarm among the other Olympians who witnessed their king in such obvious distress. The solution to this torment arrived in the form of Hephaestos, the divine smith, whose skills in metalwork and craftsmanship made him uniquely suited to address this grim necessity. Various versions of the legend offer differing accounts of how Hephaestos became involved. Some suggest Zeus commanded his assistance directly, while others claim Hephaestos offered his aid upon seeing his father's suffering. Regardless of the circumstances leading to his intervention, Hephaestos' role in the birth of Athena was to be absolutely pivotal. Armed with a bronze axe forged specifically for this unheard-of task, the smith approached the writhing Zeus with a mixture of reverence and grim determination. The other gods of Olympus gathered to witness the spectacle, though none could have predicted the miraculous nature of what they were about to behold. With a single, precise and flawless strike, Hephaestos cleaved Zeus's skull, splitting it along the natural partition from the front to the back of the head. At the moment the axe made contact, the skull of Zeus burst open with a sound the ancient poets described as a peal of thunder, echoing across Mount Olympus and the mortal world below. From this cleft did not emerge a helpless infant in need of swaddling, but a goddess fully grown, armed from head to toe and ready for war. Athena sprang forth, clad in a gleaming helmet of bronze that covered her dark tresses, clutching a spear in her right hand and bearing the Aegis shield upon her left arm. Her eyes, which would become her most defining feature, often described as flashing or grey, shone with intelligence and steely resolve, and she unleashed a war cry that shook the very foundations of the divine realm. The goddess who emerged from the head of Zeus stood tall and imposing, her physical form representing the perfect synthesis of feminine grace and military readiness. The bronze armour she wore fit her divine form flawlessly, as if it had been forged by the cosmos itself for this very moment. Her weapons did not appear new or unused, but rather like extensions of her very being. The mystical shield, the Aegis, which would later become synonymous with both Zeus and Athena, bore intricate patterns that seemed to shift and writhe in the light, creating a hypnotic effect that would serve her well in the battles to come. The gathered gods, witnessing this unparalleled birth, fell into a stunned silence. Never before had a deity emerged from another, fully formed and armed for battle, and the significance of this event was lost on none of the divine observers. Even Hephaestos, still clutching his bronze axe, stepped back in awe at the magnitude of what he had unleashed. The tool that had split the king's skull remained undamaged, yet Hephaestos would forever be remembered for this miraculous delivery. Meanwhile, Zeus experienced immediate relief from the terrible headaches that had plagued him. Yet, this physical respite was accompanied by a complex storm of emotions as he gazed upon his daughter. The prophecy that had driven him to such desperate measures had been partially fulfilled, yet in a manner that exceeded even his wildest expectations. Before him stood not merely the wise daughter foretold by fate, but a goddess who, by the very nature of her birth, displayed a wisdom and strategic capability that transcended traditional understanding. The symbolic significance of Athena springing from Zeus's head, rather than through traditional birth, cannot be overstated when seeking to understand her character and her role within the Greek pantheon. The thinkers of ancient Greece recognized that this extraordinary origin story represented far more than a fantastic tale of divine birth. The emergence of wisdom directly from the seat of thought and decision-making signified that Athena embodied not just raw intelligence, but the profound wisdom that arises from careful deliberation, strategic planning, and rational thought processes. This myth of origin also solidified Athena's unique position among the Olympians. Unlike her siblings born through conventional means, Athena's emergence from Zeus's own head forged a special, unbreakable bond between father and daughter that would define their relationship throughout the entirety of Greek mythology. She became, in essence, the physical manifestation of Zeus's own wisdom and strategic mind. Yet she maintained her independence as a distinct divine personality. The earliest literary account of Athena's birth appears in the Theogony of Hesiod, composed in the 8th century before the Common Era, which provided the foundational narrative upon which later authors would build. Hesiod's version emphasises the element of prophecy that drove Zeus to swallow Metis, stating that fate had informed Zeus that Metis would bear children of superior power, and that her son would become king of gods and men. This version establishes the birth not merely as an unusual pregnancy, but as a direct reaction to a divine decree. Hesiod's narrative also offers specific details regarding the circumstances of the birth, depicting how Zeus placed Metis within his own belly, and how the grey-eyed Athena later burst forth from his head. The poet emphasises that Athena emerged as a queen who delights in tumult, wars, and battles, a terrible, army-leading, untiring force. This description establishes, from the very beginning, Athena's dual nature as both a goddess of wisdom and a formidable warrior, traits that would define her throughout Greek literature and religious practice. Later classical sources expanded upon Hesiod's framework, adding their own interpretive elements. The poet Pindar, writing in the 5th century before the Common Era, offers a more dramatic recounting of the scene in his 7th Olympian ode, describing how Hephaestus's axe split Zeus's head and how Athena cried out with a mighty shout. Pindar's version highlights the theatrical nature of the birth and its awe-inspiring effect on the gathered assembly of gods. Much later, in the 2nd century before the Common Era, Apollodorus presented the most complete version of the myth in his work, the Bibliotheca. His narrative includes additional details about the prophecy concerning Metis' children, and provides a more systematic explanation of the events leading up to the birth. Apollodorus emphasises that Zeus swallowed Metis just as she was about to give birth to Athena, underscoring how critical the timing was to Zeus's plan to thwart the prophecy. And yet, as the Roman poet Ovid would later prepare to offer a completely different perspective in his Metamorphoses, the story of Athena continued to evolve. In the celebrated verses of the Roman poet Ovid, within his magnum opus Metamorphoses, the birth of Athena is reimagined through the lens of transformation, that enchanting and often terrifying concept that serves as the heartbeat of his work. Ovid's rendition places a poignant and tragic irony at the very centre of the narrative. The legendary shape-shifting abilities of Metis, once her greatest defence, ultimately become the weapon Zeus turns against her. In this poetic vision, the birth represents a miraculous transmutation that transcends the traditional boundaries of divine reproduction, shifting from a physical union to a metaphysical state of existence, previously unknown to the cosmos. These varied literary approaches to Athena's arrival reveal how the myth evolved across the centuries, reinterpreted by different hands and different ages, yet always retaining its unshakable, numinous core. The ominous warning of the prophecy, Zeus's absorption of Metis into his own essence, and that extraordinary delivery from the brow of the king of gods, each version added new layers of meaning, reflecting the values, fears, and understandings of their respective eras, deepening the rich and resplendent tapestry surrounding this foundational myth. Thus, the birth of Athena symbolised far more than the mere addition of a new deity to the Olympian pantheon. It marked the ascension of a goddess whose origin story perfectly encapsulated the complex relationship between wisdom, power, and divine authority. This triad would become the defining characteristic of her role throughout the entirety of Greek mythology and religious practice. The goddess who sprang from the head of Zeus, fully armed from bronze helm to greaved sandal, possessed a unique combination of divine attributes that set her apart from all her Olympian siblings. Athena's domains of dominion encompassed the most practical and strategic forms of wisdom, the art of war conducted through intellect rather than brute force, and the master craftsmanship that transforms raw, chaotic matter into objects of beauty and utility. These interconnected spheres of influence reflected not a random distribution of divine responsibilities, but a coherent and unified worldview that valued the application of intelligence to practical problems and the elevation of human civilization through thoughtful innovation. The wisdom of Athena, which the Greeks reverently termed Sophia, was fundamentally distinct from other forms of divine knowledge found within the pantheon. While Apollo, the Lord of Light, possessed a prophetic wisdom that unveiled the secrets of the future, and the Muses inspired the ethereal realms of artistic and poetic creativity, Athena's wisdom manifested as a sharp, practical intelligence, applied to real-world challenges. Her Sophia involved strategic thinking, the ability to unravel complex knots of difficulty, and the capacity to perceive connections and patterns that remained invisible to others. This was no abstract or theoretical concept, but a living, breathing force that actively engaged with the material world, seeking to improve the conditions of both gods and mortals through astute intervention and guidance. The ancient sources insistently emphasize that Athena inherited this unique brand of wisdom directly from her mother, Metis, for Metis's very name was synonymous with cunning intelligence and strategic thought. However, Athena's wisdom transcended even that of her mother, for it combined Metis's fluid strategic capabilities with the absolute authority and thunderous power derived from being born of Zeus's own head. This unique origin meant that Athena's wisdom retained the flexibility and creativity associated with feminine intelligence in Greek thought, while simultaneously carrying the gravity and weight of the divine kingship. The practical applications of Athena's wisdom became visible in nearly every sphere of human endeavour. In matters of governance, she stood as the unseen counsellor to heroes and kings, offering strategic advice that balanced immediate necessities with long-term consequences. Her guidance typically focused on achieving objectives through clever planning and diplomacy rather than direct conflict, favouring solutions that minimised unnecessary strife while maximising beneficial outcomes. This approach to problem-solving would become a defining feature of the political culture of Athens, a city that prided itself on rational debate and strategic thinking in both domestic and foreign affairs. Yet it was Athena's role as a goddess of war that represented perhaps the most distinctive aspect of her divine portfolio, especially when cast against the dark silhouette of her half-brother Ares. The contrast between them was as deep as the abyss of Tartarus. Ares revelled in the bloodlust and fury of battle, glorifying violence for its own sake, embodying the chaotic and destructive aspects of conflict. Athena, conversely, approached war as a strategic enterprise requiring careful planning, disciplined execution, and clear rational objectives. Her warfare was not aggressive but defensive, not predatory but protective. She did not seek destruction, but fought always towards a specific end, the restoration of order or the defense of civilization. This sharp distinction between the approaches of Athena and Ares mirrored broader Greek attitudes toward military conflict and its proper conduct. Ares represented the savage brutality the Greeks associated with barbarian warfare, unchecked violence, a lack of strategic thought, and the glorification of slaughter as an end in itself. Such warfare was viewed as destructive to civilization and antithetical to the Greek values of moderation and reason. Ares was often depicted as cowardly when faced with organized resistance, retreating when his initial fury failed to secure a quick victory. In stark contrast, Athena embodied the Greek ideal of war as a necessary instrument to preserve civilization and uphold justice. Her military interventions were typically defensive, aiming to protect cities, heroes, or principles rather than to conquer land or inflict suffering. When she did engage in offensive operations, they were carefully planned campaigns with specific strategic goals, conducted with discipline and restraint. Her warriors were known not for their individual savagery or bloodlust, but for their training, their equipment, and their tactical sophistication. The goddess's approach to war emphasized the paramount importance of preparation, training, and technological superiority. She was intimately linked with the development of military innovations, including improvements in armor design, the forging of more effective weaponry, and the creation of superior tactical formations. The famous Greek phalanx formation, which relied on disciplined coordination rather than individual heroics, perfectly reflected Athena's influence on military thought. This formation required extensive training, mutual trust among the soldiers, and a rigid adherence to tactical doctrine, all qualities that aligned perfectly with Athena's emphasis on wisdom and strategy in battle. The third great pillar of Athena's dominion, craftsmanship, represented the application of intellect and skill to the creation of useful and beautiful objects. This domain encompassed not only the technical aspects of various trades, but also the creative intelligence required to imagine new possibilities and solve practical problems through innovation. Her patronage extended to metalworking, pottery, weaving, shipbuilding, and countless other crafts that formed the bedrock of Greek economic and cultural life. The association of the goddess with craftsmanship reflected the Greek understanding that true skill required more than mere manual dexterity, or familiarity with traditional techniques. Master craftsmen needed to understand the properties of their materials, the principles underlying their techniques, and the requirements of the intended users. They had to be able to adapt their methods to new challenges, devise solutions to unprecedented problems, and maintain consistently high standards across different projects. These requirements were in perfect harmony with Athena's fusion of practical wisdom and meticulous attention to detail. Weaving held a special significance among the crafts of Athena, serving as both a practical skill essential for household management and a profound metaphor for the complex bonds that characterize civilized society. The goddess's mastery of weaving was legendary. Ancient sources wax lyrical about her ability to create fabrics of unparalleled beauty and complexity. Her weavings were said to incorporate not only traditional patterns and techniques, but also innovative designs that told stories, conveyed symbolic meanings, and displayed technical feats that inspired other female artisans to push the boundaries of their own skills. The symbolic significance of weaving extended far beyond its practical applications, representing the goddess's role in creating and maintaining the social fabric that holds communities together. Just as every single thread must be carefully chosen, prepared, and interlaced to create a strong and beautiful cloth, so too do individual citizens require guidance, education, and coordination to form effective and harmonious societies. Thus, Athena's patronage of weaving symbolized her broader role in civilizing humanity and fostering the cooperative relationships that make cultural progress possible. Amidst this rich tapestry of symbolism, the owl emerged as Athena's most recognizable sacred animal, embodying many aspects of the goddess's nature and serving as her constant companion in both artistic representations and mythological narratives. The selection of the owl as Athena's totem was no random decision. Rather, it was based on a careful observation of the bird's characteristics and their alignment with the goddess's attributes. Owls possessed several qualities that made them fitting symbols for a goddess of wisdom and strategic warfare. The owl's extraordinary night vision allowed it to see clearly in darkness, where other creatures were effectively blind, making it a natural symbol for a type of insight that pierces through confusion to reveal hidden truths. This ability aligned perfectly with Athena's role as a goddess capable of finding solutions to complex problems and identifying opportunities that others missed. The owl's ability to see in the dark also represented the goddess's capacity to provide guidance during difficult times when conventional wisdom failed. The nocturnal nature of owl activity reinforced its association with vigilance and wakefulness, qualities essential for both wisdom and war. While other creatures slept, owls remained alert throughout the night, monitoring their territories for threats and opportunities. This state of constant vigilance paralleled Athena's role as a protective goddess who watched over her cities and heroes, ready to intervene whenever threats arose or aid was needed. The image of the owl keeping its watch through the dark hours became a powerful symbol of the goddess's unwavering attention to her responsibilities. Furthermore, the owl's hunting techniques displayed the same combination of patience, observation, and precise execution that characterized Athena's approach to both war and problem-solving. Owls do not rely on brute force or aggressive pursuit. Instead, they use their superior senses to locate prey, their silent flight to approach undetected, and their sharp talons to strike with lethal precision. This style of hunting embodied the strategic approach Athena preferred over the direct confrontation favoured by Ares. The city of Athens embraced this bird as its civic symbol, incorporating the image of the owl into the city's coinage and official emblems. One of the most widely circulated coins in the ancient Mediterranean world, the Athenian silver tetradrachm, worth 4 drachmas, bore the head of Athena on one side, and on the reverse, accompanied often by a sprig of olive, stood that famous, wide-eyed owl. Upon the face of these silver discs, etched alongside the abbreviated name of the city, lay the delicate image of the olive branch, a timeless emblem of peace and abundance. Yet, these pieces of gleaming silver were far more than mere currency or simple tools of commercial exchange. They were the silent ambassadors of Athenian values, carrying the visage of that wise owl to the farthest reaches of the Greek world and into the barbarous lands beyond. The dominant presence of the owl upon the coinage was a testament to how deeply the city identified with the wisdom of Athena, serving as a tangible token of the practical material benefits granted by her divine patronage. Athens had constructed its towering prosperity and immense wealth upon the bedrock of trade, master craftsmanship, and the projection of naval power, domains in which the influence of Athena was particularly potent and decisive. The deep subterranean veins of the silver mines at Laurium provided the raw, glittering ore from the bowels of the earth, essential for minting these coins. In turn, the artisans of Athens, channeling the inspiration and technical mastery of their goddess, transformed this raw silver into currency of such unvarying weight and purity that it became trusted and sought after across the entire Mediterranean basin. The owl's unblinking stare upon the coin served as a guarantee of Athenian reliability and a mark of excellence in craftsmanship, functioning almost as a divine seal of approval. The olive branch, however, represented the most profound gift Athena had bestowed upon humanity, shining as the primary symbol of her benevolent, nourishing influence over civilization. The mythological narrative of how Athens received its name is rooted in a legendary contest between Athena and Poseidon, the earth-shaker and lord of the seas, where each deity offered a gift to the inhabitants of the city to secure their devotion. The legend unfolds with dramatic intensity. Poseidon, seeking to claim the land, raised his colossal trident and struck the earth with earth-shattering force. From the cleft rock, a spring of water burst forth. Yet, true to the nature of the sea god, this water was brackish and salty. It was fit neither for drinking nor for watering the crops, serving only as a symbol of the ocean's untamed and wild power. In response, Athena stepped forward, displaying her characteristic foresight and practical wisdom. She did not strike the earth to destroy, but to create. She touched the ground with her spear, and from that spot the very first olive tree took root, spiralling upward to spread its silver-green canopy. The inhabitants of that first settlement, which had not yet taken the name Athens, realized without hesitation that Athena's gift held a value far surpassing the salty spring of Poseidon. For the olive tree harboured within its trunk and fruit countless benefits that would sustain and enrich human life for generations to come. The fruit of this miraculous tree could be consumed fresh, or cured to become a reliable source of sustenance that could be stored without spoiling through the lean winter months. The golden oil pressed from its flesh served a multitude of purposes, from the culinary arts that sustained the body to the fueling of clay lamps that banished the darkness of night, and from the cleansing of the self to the anointing of sacred altars in rituals to the gods. The wood of the olive tree offered excellent material for construction and the crafting of tools, while its leaves provided medicine for the sick and fodder for the beasts of the field. Yet, the symbolic weight of the olive tree extended far beyond its utility, embodying the very principles Athena represented. The longevity of a single tree, which can live and bear fruit for hundreds, even thousands of years, mirrored the enduring nature of wisdom and the long-term benefits of thoughtful, patient planning. Unlike common crops that must be sown and reaped with the turning of every year, the planting of an olive grove represented a profound investment in the future. It was a source of abundance that required patience and care in the beginning, but once rooted, would provide for families across many lifetimes. The olive branch became the universal signifier of peace, reflecting Athena's preference for resolving conflict through negotiation and strategic intellect rather than mindless violence. This connection between the olive and peace was not merely a poetic allegory, but reflected the harsh practicalities of ancient Mediterranean life. The cultivation of olives required long periods of stability and security, for the trees took many years to mature and bear fruit. Communities that invested in olive groves were effectively declaring their commitment to peaceful coexistence and their confidence in their ability to maintain control over their lands. By planting these trees, which demanded patience, they wove a pact of stability with the future. Furthermore, olive oil played a vital role in Greek religious practice, serving as a libation poured out to the gods and a sacred medium for various ritual activities. In the great stadiums of the Olympic Games and other athletic contests, competitors would anoint their bodies with olive oil before their struggles, doing so for practical muscle preparation, but also as a form of worship honouring the divine. The wreaths of victory placed upon the brows of champions were woven from wild olive branches, linking athletic glory with divine favour and the peaceful competition that Athena preferred over the devastation of war. The economic importance of olive cultivation in the ancient Greek world cannot be overstated. Olive oil became one of the most valuable commodities in the Mediterranean, creating immense wealth that financed artistic masterpieces, military campaigns, and civic improvements. Athens, in particular, garnered fame for the superior quality of its oil, The distinctive Athenian amphorae carried this precious liquid to markets at the edges of the known world. The prosperity generated by the olive groves allowed Athens to feed its swelling population, maintain its formidable navy, and patronize the architects, sculptors, and philosophers who would build the cultural legacy for which the city is forever renowned. Among the panoply of Athena's symbols, the aegis stood as the most distinctive and potent icon of her protection, serving simultaneously as a piece of defensive armour and a weapon of terror against her foes. Ancient sources offer varied descriptions of this eldritch artifact. Some depict it as a shield, others as a goatskin cloak or breastplate, and still others as an enchanted garment that shifted its form to suit the need of the moment. Despite these variations in its physical description, all accounts converge on a single terrifying truth. The aegis bore the severed head of the Gorgon Medusa and possessed supernatural protective powers. The Gorgon's head, mounted upon the centre of Athena's aegis, represented one of the most powerful apotropaic symbols in Greek culture, a talisman of such horror that its gaze could turn enemies to stone. The hero Perseus had slain Medusa with the guidance of Athena, and the goddess claimed the severed head as her prize, incorporating it into her own divine panoply. The presence of Medusa's visage upon the aegis served a dual function. It provided passive protection against assaults and acted as an active weapon capable of paralysing particularly dangerous adversaries with dread. The aegis was far more than a simple piece of armour. It was a manifestation of divine authority, a symbol of the power to protect the faithful and strike terror into the wicked. When Athena donned the aegis, it signalled her readiness for war, offering a mantle of safety to her allies while broadcasting a grim warning to her enemies. It was said that the mere sight of the goddess bearing the aegis instilled lion-hearted courage in her followers and cast a deep, freezing fear into the hearts of those who dared oppose her. The spear, held firmly in her grasp, completed Athena's military attire, representing her martial prowess and her readiness to engage in conflict when peaceful resolutions crumbled. Unlike the aegis, which held primarily defensive and symbolic functions, the spear was an overtly offensive weapon, demonstrating the goddess's willingness to employ force when necessary. However, Athena's spear was not solely an instrument of war. As demonstrated in the creation myth of the olive tree, it was also a tool of creation and transformation. The goddess's spear embodied the principle that power, when applied with wisdom, can create rather than destroy. The same weapon that could strike down enemies on the battlefield could, when struck against the earth, call forth life-sustaining vegetation, proving that force guided by intellect serves constructive ends. This dual nature of the spear reflected Athena's broader philosophy, that strength should be used not to dominate and exploit, but to protect and nurture. In the iconography of Athena, the union of the aegis and the spear represented the full spectrum of strategic options available to a wise leader. The aegis provided protection and deterrence through the display of defensive capability, while the spear offered the means for decisive action should deterrence fail. Together, these symbols encapsulated the principle that effective leadership requires both the wisdom to avoid unnecessary conflict and the strength to triumph when battle becomes inevitable. The founding of Athens as the preeminent city-state of ancient Greece began with a divine rivalry that would fundamentally shape the settlement's character and identity for millennia. The contest between Athena and Poseidon for the patronage of the city represents one of the most politically and culturally significant myths in Greek tradition, holding within its narrative the core values and priorities that would come to define Athenian civilization. The story takes place during the era of the early Attic settlement, when the rocky outcrop that would later become the Acropolis attracted its first permanent inhabitants, who recognized the strategic advantages of this defensible position, overlooking the surrounding plains and the distant sea. The roots of this contest can be traced back to the time when the Proto-Athenian settlement began to establish itself as a significant regional power. Archaeological evidence suggests that the Acropolis had been inhabited since the Neolithic age, but it was during the Late Bronze Age that the site began to develop the characteristics that would make it so alluring to rival divine patrons. The location of the settlement offered natural defensive advantages, with sheer cliffs on three sides and a commanding view of approaches from both land and sea. Freshwater springs on the northern slopes of the Acropolis provided life, while the surrounding plains offered fertile farmland for grain cultivation and grazing. Both Athena and Poseidon recognized the potential of this burgeoning settlement and sought to claim it as their own sacred city. Poseidon's interest stemmed from his dominion over the seas, and his particular affinity for coastal settlements dependent on maritime trade and naval strength. The proximity of the Proto-Athenian settlement to the Saronic Gulf and its potential as a naval base made it an attractive addition to Poseidon's sphere of influence. The sea god understood well that control over this strategic location would provide him a powerful anchor from which to project his influence across the Aegean. Athena's interest, conversely, reflected her broader concern for the development of civilized society and her special affinity for communities that valued wisdom, craftsmanship, and strategic thought. The inhabitants of the Proto-Athenian settlement had already demonstrated these qualities through their selection of the Acropolis and their early efforts to cultivate trade relationships with neighbouring communities. The goddess sensed that this community held the potential to become a centre of learning and cultural achievement that would mirror her own values and spread her influence throughout the Greek world. The formal contest between the two deities was arranged according to the ancient protocols governing divine rivalries for the patronage of mortals. Rather than resolving their dispute through a direct cataclysmic conflict that might devastate the very settlement they sought to protect, Athena and Poseidon agreed to present gifts to the inhabitants, allowing the people, or their representatives, to choose their preferred patron based on the practical value and symbolic significance of each offering. This approach reflected the Greek understanding that divine patronage should benefit the mortal community rather than merely serving to establish divine authority over them. The burden of judgment fell upon the shoulders of the first kings of Athens, who were tasked with acting as arbiters in this celestial dispute. Those who accepted the heavy and sacred responsibility of adjudicating this divine contest were figures whose names have been preserved within the fragmented pages of mythological tradition, yet whose historical existence remains a subject of fervent debate among scholars. Whether they were flesh and blood rulers emerging from the dusty annals of history, or heroes born amidst the mists of legend, these regents represented the leadership of the community, bearing the profound obligation of shaping the settlement's future development, its destiny, and its very soul through their verdict. The ancient sources point to King Cecrops as the presiding figure of this jury. They depict him as a paragon of wisdom, one capable of looking beyond the veil of appearances to discern the deep realities lying beneath surface events. And according to the mythological narratives, Cecrops was not merely a king, but an enchanted being who bridged the chasm between the mortal and divine realms. He was often depicted as a creature of liminal nature, possessing the torso of a man and the coiled serpentine body of a snake from the waist down. This hybrid form symbolized his role as a mediator between the anxieties of mortals and the world of the immortals, rendering him the most suitable judge for a contest between gods. Those reptilian features, reminiscent of the serpent, connected him directly to the earth itself, implying a profound understanding of the language of the soil and the needs of the land. Archaeological evidence unearthed from the Acropolis contains references to early snake cults, demonstrating just how vital and sacred the symbolism of the serpent was to the earliest inhabitants of this sacred rock. The contest commenced with Poseidon, the lord of the seas, stepping forward to display his divine power and the benefits he could bestow upon the settlement. The mighty god of the oceans approached the highest point of the Acropolis, where the majestic Parthenon temple would later rise, and hoisted his colossal three-pronged spear, the trident, high above his head. Forged in the darkest and most pressurized depths of the ocean, enchanted with the power to command the tempestuous seas and to shake the earth with tremors, the weapon gleamed with a menacing brilliance under the Mediterranean sun, as Poseidon prepared to present his gift. The gathered assembly watched with a mixture of terror and awe as the god brought his trident down with immense force, the sound of the metal striking the rocky ground of the Acropolis echoing across the entire landscape like a peal of thunder. The violent impact of Poseidon's trident cleaved a dramatic fissure into the limestone bedrock, and from this wound in the earth, a spring of crystal-clear water instantly began to gush forth. To see water bursting from solid rock at the most arid and elevated point of the Acropolis astounded the observers, who knew well how vital access to reliable water sources was for a permanent settlement. The spring bubbled with considerable pressure, forming a pool that reflected the sky and stood as a testament to Poseidon's ability to transport the life-giving properties of water to even the most unexpected places. However, once the initial wave of excitement from witnessing this miraculous spring had subsided, the practical limitations of Poseidon's gift began to reveal themselves in a bitter fashion. The water flowing from the god's fountain carried the distinct salty taste and scent of the sea. This rendered it completely unsuitable for drinking, for cooking, or for irrigating the fields. While the spring represented an impressive display of divine power, its practical utility was exceedingly limited. The brine could neither sustain human life nor support agricultural activities. Its presence upon the Acropolis served more as a monument to Poseidon's raw, untamed power than as a genuine utility offered to the society. Yet the creation of this saltwater spring carried a profound and symbolic meaning that the gathered judges could not ignore. Poseidon's gift represented the promise of making the settlement a great naval power, possessed of the wealth and influence that comes from controlling the maritime trade routes. The saltwater symbolized the connection between this hilltop settlement and the vast, endless network of Mediterranean commerce, whispering that under Poseidon's patronage, the city would transform into a grand hub of seafaring and trade. The god's gift implied that the inhabitants would become skilled mariners and merchants, transporting exotic goods and the riches of foreign lands to their rocky citadel. But the saltwater spring also represented the volatile and unpredictable nature of Poseidon himself, reflecting both the opportunities and the perils associated with a maritime existence. The sea could provide immense wealth through trade and fishing, yet it could also bring devastating storms, hostile fleets, and the perpetual uncertainty that characterizes a life dependent on the waves. Thus, Poseidon's gift embodied both a promise and a warning. It offered greatness, but at the cost of eternal risk and instability. When the turn came to Athena, the goddess advanced toward the very same spot where Poseidon had shaken the earth. However, her demeanor was markedly different from the dramatic display of raw power that had characterized her rival's presentation. Instead of raising her spear in an overt show of strength, Athena held her weapon at a more modest angle. This stance suggested that her gift would be born not of overwhelming might, but of wisdom and careful consideration. The grey eyes of the goddess scanned the gathered crowd with an expression of deep contemplation, as if she were weighing not only the immediate situation, but the long-term needs and potential of the community. The strike Athena delivered to the rock of the Acropolis was executed with the precision of a surgeon, rather than the brute force of a titan. The tip of her spear found the exact point necessary to achieve her intended result. The sound of her weapon striking the stone was sharp and clean. It lacked the thunderous echoes that had accompanied Poseidon's spectacle, yet it carried its own resonance of authority and purpose. From the spot where her spear touched the earth, something unprecedented in the experience of the gathered observers began to grow. The first olive tree rose from the rocky soil of the Acropolis with a speed that defied natural processes, yet it retained the organic beauty of normal plant growth. The roots of the tree spread rapidly within the limestone bedrock, finding purchase in the crevices and drawing nourishment from sources unseen by mortal eyes. Its trunk rose straight and strong, developing that characteristic gnarled bark that would become familiar to generations of olive cultivators. Its branches spread in a pleasing pattern that provided both structural resilience and aesthetic elegance. Its unique silvery green leaves caught the Mediterranean light in such a way that they created a constantly shifting play of colour and shadow. As the tree reached full maturity mere moments after its creation, it immediately began to bear the fruit that would become Athens' most precious resource. The olives appearing on Athena's tree displayed a flawless ripeness, their colours ranging from deep green to rich purple-black depending on their position and exposure to the sunlight. The fruit hung in bountiful clusters, promising not just momentary satiation, but a productivity that would endure for years to come. To see a fully mature, fruit-bearing olive tree standing where, only minutes before, there had been nothing but bare rock, was the most tangible proof that divine power had been directed toward practical and beneficial ends. The gathered judges and observers immediately grasped the superior practical value of Athena's gift compared to Poseidon's saltwater spring. The olive tree offered a multitude of forms of sustenance and utility that would benefit the community in both immediate and long-term ways. Its fruit could be consumed fresh during the harvest season or preserved in various forms to provide nourishment throughout the year. The oil extracted from the olives would serve vital functions in cooking, illumination, personal hygiene, and religious ceremonies, while also providing a valuable commodity for trade with other communities. Beyond its immediate practical benefits, the olive tree represented an approach fundamentally different from the concept of divine patronage embodied by Poseidon's gift. Where the saltwater springs symbolise power and grandeur achieved through dramatic displays of force, the olive tree represented wisdom applied to genuine human needs. Athena's gift demonstrated that she understood what the community actually required for its long-term prosperity, and it signalled a commitment to providing practical assistance rather than impressive but ultimately useless displays of divine might. The symbolic significance of the olive tree extended far beyond its material benefits, representing the values and priorities that would define Athenian civilization. The longevity of the tree symbolized the enduring nature of wisdom and the importance of making decisions based on long-term considerations rather than short-term impulses. Unlike annual crops that require constant replanting and provide only fleeting benefits, the olive tree represented an investment in the future and a confidence in the community's ability to maintain stability over long periods. The peaceful nature of olive cultivation stood in sharp contrast to the violent and unpredictable character of the maritime life under Poseidon's patronage. Olive groves required careful tending and protection rather than aggressive expansion or conquest. They encouraged the development of stable, defensible communities rather than sea voyages to distant lands. Olive cultivation also fostered cooperation among neighbours. Successful olive farming often required shared knowledge, coordinated labour during harvest seasons, and mutual solidarity to protect the precious groves from raiders or natural disasters. The decision-making process that followed the presentation of both gifts mirrored the democratic principles that would later become central to Athenian political culture. Rather than simply accepting the judgment of King Cecrops alone, the community engaged in a comprehensive debate and deliberation regarding the relative merits of each divine offering. The citizens examined both gifts from multiple perspectives. They evaluated not only the immediate benefits, but also the long-term effects on the community's development and character. These discussions revolving around the divine gifts brought to light fundamental questions about the type of society the residents wished to create. Those who supported Poseidon's gift argued that naval power offered the greatest potential for wealth, influence, and expansion beyond the limited borders of Attica, pointing to the examples of other coastal settlements that had risen to prominence through maritime trade and naval strength. They suggested that accepting Poseidon's patronage would position their community to compete successfully with established sea powers across the Mediterranean. Conversely, those who championed Athena's olive tree emphasized the stability and self-sufficiency that agricultural prosperity could provide. They argued that communities dependent on maritime trade remained vulnerable to factors beyond their control, such as storms, piracy, and volatile political relations that could disrupt established trade routes. The olive tree offered a form of wealth that could not be easily stolen or destroyed, providing a secure foundation for gradual but sustainable growth and development. The final verdict rendered in favour of Athena reflected the community's collective judgment that wisdom and practical utility should triumph over dramatic displays of power. Although the citizens acknowledged that Poseidon's gift might offer greater grandeur, they chose to take shelter in the shade of that rooted and enduring wisdom offered by Athena, in stark contrast to the ephemeral excitement and the promise of rapid, unchecked expansion offered by Poseidon. A glory as transient and volatile as the sea foam itself, the olive tree of Athena provided that unshakable subterranean foundation necessary for long-term prosperity and cultural flourishing. This fateful choice established a precedent for decision-making that would echo through the corridors of Athenian history for centuries to come, shaping the very identity of the city-state. Thus was born a tradition of wisdom that prioritized careful analysis and strategic foresight over impulsive action, or the pursuit of immediate fleeting gratification. The acceptance of Athena as the patron goddess of the city inaugurated an era of intense religious and architectural devotion atop the high crag of the Acropolis. The earliest temples consecrated to Athena were, by later standards, relatively modest structures reflecting the limited resources of the nascent community. Yet this architectural simplicity could not overshadow the profound depth of their understanding of divine honour. Archaeological evidence and the hushed whispers of ancient narratives suggest that the very first temple was erected directly alongside the spot where Athena's olive tree had first broken the soil, enclosing that sacred arboreal gift within the holy precincts to guard it for the generations yet unborn. These primordial temples served a purpose far transcending the mere performance of ritual rites. They were multifaceted institutions that blurred the lines between the sacred and the civic. They stood as the supreme councils where vital decisions concerning the community were weighed and measured, as treasuries where the city's most precious assets were secured, and as the beating heart where the pulse of the people could be felt. The dimly lit, incense-wreathed halls of these sanctuaries housed the cult image of Athena, which became the focal point for regular religious observances and the grand rhythmic festivals that celebrated the goddess's ceaseless vigilance over her city. The temple precincts encompassed open gathering spaces where citizens could debate their common concerns, engaging in those early democratic processes believed to be inspired and guided by the very wisdom of Athena herself. The construction of these edifices upon the Acropolis demanded a significant portion of the community's labour and wealth, yet this arduous effort stood as a testament to the inhabitants' unwavering commitment to honour their chosen protectress with the dignity she commanded. These sacred structures were hewn from the indigenous limestone of the Acropolis itself, extracted from the bedrock so that the buildings appeared not as foreign additions, but as organic extensions of the holy ground where Athena had first manifested her favour. The architectural style achieved a sublime harmony, reflecting both the emerging principles of Greek aesthetics and the practical necessities of enduring the extremes of the weather atop that windswept prominence. The metamorphosis of Athens from a humble settlement into the preeminent city-state of Greece laid the foundations for that legendary theatre, where Athena would orchestrate her most significant intervention in the affairs of mortals, the siege of Troy. That conflict, destined to rage for 10 long years and be immortalized as the Trojan War, offered the perfect stage for Athena to demonstrate her strategic genius and her fierce, protective loyalty to those Greek heroes who blended courage with wisdom. Her role in this epic cataclysm extended far beyond simple divine favoritism. It represented a comprehensive campaign to ensure the triumph of intellect and strategic order over brute force and chaotic violence. Athena's involvement in the Trojan War had begun in the high courts of Olympus, long before the first black-hulled Greek ships ever grated against the sands of the Troad. The goddess had observed with mounting disquiet the growing arrogance and impiety displayed by the Trojans, their repeated failures to accord the gods their due honour, and specifically the egregious violation of the sacred bonds of hospitality by Paris when he abducted Helen from the palace of Menelaus in Sparta. The theft of Helen was far more than a personal slight or a political crisis. This act represented a fundamental cosmic challenge to the divine order that governed the relationships between mortals and immortals, between hosts and guests, and among the civilized peoples of the Mediterranean world. The goddess's decision to champion the Greek cause reflected her broad and unyielding commitment to upholding the principles of justice and righteous conduct, which she deemed essential for the existence of any civilized society. The actions of Paris, beginning with his abuse of Menelaus's hospitality, and culminating in the theft of both the queen and a significant portion of the Spartan royal treasury, constituted a violation of multiple sacred obligations. These transgressions could not be ignored without shaking the very foundations of the international laws and religious duties that allowed different kingdoms to interact in peace. Athena's strategic approach to the conflict stood in sharp relief against the impulsive violence that characterized other divine interventions in mortal affairs. She eschewed the chaotic fray for a methodology of careful planning and coordinated action. Rather than descending to the battlefield to slaughter Trojan warriors with her own hand, she chose to operate through mortal proxies, her chosen heroes, serving as the ultimate exemplar of how divine wisdom can enhance human capabilities without erasing human will or responsibility. This approach reflected her profound understanding that a lasting victory required not merely military success, but the establishment of precedents and principles that would guide future conduct. The goddess's selection of her favourite heroes mirrored her ability to recognise and nurture the specific qualities she most valued in mortal champions. King Odysseus of Ithaca embodied that intellectual malleability and strategic creativity that Athena prized above all other martial virtues. His reputation for devising ingenious solutions to seemingly impossible problems had rendered him one of Greece's most valuable military assets, even before the Trojan expedition was launched. In Odysseus, Athena recognized a kindred spirit, a soul whose innate brilliance could be honed and directed by divine guidance, without ever losing its essential humanity. Diomedes, the young king of Argos, represented a different yet equally vital form of heroic excellence. fusing physical prowess with tactical intelligence and an unshakable, disciplined courage. Unlike his contemporaries, who relied primarily on individual strength and ferocity, Diomedes understood war as a coordinated effort requiring discipline, planning, and the ability to adapt to the shifting tides of battle. His willingness to accept divine guidance while maintaining his own moral judgment made him the ideal instrument for Athena's strategic interventions. The greatest of Greek warriors, Achilles, presented both immense opportunity and significant challenge to the goddess. His divine lineage through his mother, Thetis, and his peerless combat abilities made him capable of feats that no purely mortal warrior could hope to achieve. However, his volcanic temper and his propensity for excessive pride required careful management to prevent his destructive impulses from undermining the Greek cause. Athena's relationship with Achilles demonstrated her masterful skill in working with difficult personalities and channeling their raw, explosive talents toward constructive ends. The siege of Troy itself unfolded as a complex military and diplomatic tapestry that tested every facet of Athena's strategic capabilities. The city's formidable defences, including walls erected in a bygone age by the very hands of the gods, Apollo and Poseidon during their servitude to King Laomedon, rendered a direct assault inextricably costly and potentially futile. The Trojan army, commanded by the noble Hector and bolstered by countless allied contingents from across the breadth of Asia Minor, possessed both the numerical strength and the tactical acumen to maintain an effective resistance against the Greek invasion force. Athena's initial interventions focused on providing her chosen champions with the enhanced faculties necessary to prevail in individual combat, while simultaneously building the gradual psychological and tactical advantages that would ultimately make a Greek victory possible. Her assistance took many forms, ranging from direct physical augmentation in critical moments to the whispering of strategic counsel that allowed Greek commanders to identify and exploit Trojan weaknesses. The goddess displayed a remarkable subtlety in her intercessions, providing support that amplified her champions' natural gifts, but did not render them dependent on divine aid to be effective. The relationship between Athena and Odysseus evolved into one of the most fruitful partnerships in all of Greek mythology, characterized by mutual respect and a shared commitment to achieving goals through wit rather than brute strength. Odysseus's natural cunning and strategic insight aligned perfectly with Athena's preference for indirect approaches to problem-solving, creating a collaboration that consistently produced innovative solutions to military stalemates. The goddess valued Odysseus's capacity to think several moves ahead of his adversaries and his flexibility to adapt his plans when circumstances shifted unexpectedly. Athena's guidance of Odysseus during the siege demonstrated her understanding that successful military leadership required not just tactical brilliance, but the ability to maintain morale and cohesion among a diverse and often fractious coalition of allied forces. The Greek army assembled at Troy included contingents from every corner of the Greek world, each with its own traditions, leadership styles, and strategic priorities. Odysseus's diplomatic skills, fortified by the wisdom of Athena, were vital in maintaining the fragile coalition that made the Greek victory possible. The goddess's support for Diomedes manifested most dramatically during his Aristeia, that day of supreme prowess when he dominated the battlefield and even succeeded in wounding 2 Olympian gods who had intervened on the Trojan side. During this event, Athena's enhancement of Diomedes' natural abilities demonstrated her willingness to escalate divine involvement when circumstances demanded a more direct intervention. She lifted the mist from his eyes, the archleis, that normally prevents mortals from perceiving the divine, allowing Diomedes to recognize and engage Aphrodite and Ares when they attempted to shield their favorite Trojan champions. The confrontation between Diomedes and Aphrodite revealed significant aspects of Athena's strategic thought and her understanding of the distinct roles played by the various Olympians in mortal conflicts. Aphrodite's intervention on behalf of her son Aeneas represented the type of emotional and impulsive divine favoritism that Athena believed to be counterproductive to resolving complex issues with lasting solutions. By enabling Diomedes to wound Aphrodite and force her from the field, Athena proved that strategic thought and disciplined action could overcome even divine opposition based on personal whim, provided that opposition lacked a principled commitment to justice. The encounter between Diomedes and Ares, however, carried even greater weight in establishing Athena's supremacy in matters of war and strategic thought. Ares had entered the fray to support Troy, bringing with him the chaotic violence and undisciplined fury that characterized his approach to military conflict. His presence on the battlefield initially sowed panic among the Greek forces, who found themselves facing not merely mortal enemies, but the living embodiment of war's most destructive aspects. Athena's response to this threat was both sharp and instructive. Athena's riposte to this cacophony of mindless violence revealed not only the sharpness of her tactical genius, but also the profound, unbridgeable chasm that separated her philosophy of war from that of Ares. Rather than engaging in a direct brute force collision with the god of war, a spectacle that would have reduced the battlefield to a smoking crater, Athena chose to operate through the mortal vessel of Diomedes. She guided his spear with a precision that bordered on the preordained, driving the weapon through the divine armour of Ares, which was thought to be impenetrable, and inflicting a wound so grievous that it forced the screaming deity to flee the field of battle. This victory represented far more than a simple tactical success. It stood as a definitive philosophical statement that the disciplined strategic mind will always triumph over chaotic, uncontrolled rage. The retreat of Ares proved to the cosmos that even divine strength can be humbled when human courage is perfectly coordinated with and directed by divine wisdom. Yet the most resplendent and earth-shattering manifestation of Athena's strategic brilliance emerged in the design and execution of the Trojan horse. This masterstroke combined psychological warfare, engineering innovation, and tactical deception in ways that no military operation in the history of the world had ever attempted. The concept was born from Athena's cold realization that the defensive advantages of Troy, its towering walls and geographical position, rendered a traditional assault prohibitively costly and ultimately impossible. She perceived that the city's cultural values and deep-seated religious beliefs created potential fractures in their armour, weaknesses that could be exploited through a carefully constructed ruse. The construction of the wooden horse required not merely extraordinary craftsmanship, but a profound, almost eldritch understanding of Trojan psychology and their ritualistic practices. Athena channeled her mastery of woodcraft and engineering through the hands of the master artisan Epeios, guiding him to create a structure that appeared to the untrained eye as a magnificent religious offering, while in truth serving as a clandestine transport system for the Greek elite. The design of the horse embodied a multi-layered deception, presenting itself as a gift of atonement to Athena herself, while secretly functioning as the instrument of Troy's annihilation. The religious symbolism embedded in the horse's form reflected Athena's sophisticated understanding of how cultural beliefs could be manipulated to achieve strategic objectives. The Trojans, possessing a deep reverence for horses which they associated with both divine favour and military prowess, were predisposed to view this colossal wooden effigy not as a threat, but as a positive omen, a final tribute from a defeated foe. The inscription carved upon the beast, claiming the structure was dedicated to Athena to ensure the Greeks' safe return across the wine-dark sea, exploited the Trojans' assumptions about Greek religious piety while concealing the offering's true, deadly purpose. The selection of the warriors who would hide within the belly of this wooden beast displayed Athena's meticulous attention to the psychological requirements of the mission, which were just as critical as the military ones. The chosen heroes needed to possess not only unparalleled combat skills, but a mental discipline as rigid as iron, capable of remaining silent and motionless for hours while surrounded by their sworn enemies. It was no coincidence that Odysseus was chosen to lead this elite cadre, for he reflected that unique combination of tactical brilliance and psychological resilience necessary to coordinate such a complex operation upon which the fate of the war hinged. The goddess's management of the Trojan horse strategy extended far beyond the initial concept and construction. It encompassed the careful orchestration of events designed to persuade the Trojans to breach their own walls and welcome the structure into their citadel. The theatrical retreat of the Greek fleet from the beaches of Troy, leaving behind only the mysterious horse and the captured spy Sinon, created the precise psychological conditions required to make the deception take root. Athena's unseen influence guided every aspect of this elaborate performance, ensuring that every element contributed to the overwhelming impression of a Greek defeat and departure. The testimony given by Sinon regarding the horse's supposed religious significance represented perhaps the most critical element of Athena's ruse, for it required not only convincing acting, but a deep knowledge of both Greek and Trojan religious protocols. Sinon's fabricated tale, that the Greeks had built the offering to such a colossal size specifically so the Trojans could not drag it into their city, and thus steal Athena's favour, appealed directly to the Trojans' understanding of divine psychology. Simultaneously, it stoked their pride and their desperate desire to possess an object of such obvious value and religious power. The internal debates that raged among the Trojan leaders regarding whether to admit the horse revealed the terrifying effectiveness of Athena's psychological manipulation, while also highlighting the tragic consequences of ignoring wise counsel. The priest Laocoon, who warned of the dangers of gifts bearing the mark of the enemy, voiced the very kind of strategic clarity that Athena herself prized. However, his sound advice was drowned out by the potent mixture of religious fervour and political opportunism that the goddess had carefully cultivated among the other Trojan elders. The subsequent destruction of Laocoon and his sons by sea serpents sent by Poseidon represented a grim intersection of divine politics, serving Athena's strategic ends through the hand of another deity. Whether Poseidon's intervention stemmed from his own ancient grudge against Troy or other considerations, it effectively silenced the most credible voice of opposition. This moment of divine terror demonstrated how Athena's strategic planning could encompass and utilize the actions of other gods, weaving their motivations into her own grand design, even when their reasons differed from hers. The night attack that followed the horse's acceptance into Troy showcased Athena's ability to coordinate complex military operations while maintaining the absolute discipline and focus required for success. The warriors hidden within the horse had to emerge at the precise psychological and temporal moment, neutralizing the sentries and securing the city gates for the returning Greek army, all while preserving the element of surprise that made victory possible. The goddess's guidance ensured that every phase of this intricate operation unfolded exactly according to the plan. Although the night was rife with opportunities for chaos or failure, Athena's hand remained steady. Her conflicts with other Olympian gods during the fall of Troy reflected broader disagreements regarding the proper relationship between gods and mortals and the appropriate methods for resolving conflicts between nations. Her opposition to Aphrodite stemmed not merely from supporting opposing sides in the war, but from fundamental philosophical differences regarding the values that should guide both divine and mortal behaviour. Aphrodite's emphasis on passion, beauty, and emotional gratification stood in direct, irreconcilable conflict with Athena's devotion to rational decision-making, strategic planning, and the consideration of long-term consequences. The contrast between Athena's approach to war and that preferred by Ares became one of the defining themes of the Trojan conflict. Each deity represented a radically different philosophy regarding the nature and purpose of military action. Ares embodied the chaotic, destructive aspects of war that the Greeks associated with barbarism and the breakdown of civilized order. His delight in bloodshed for its own sake and his indifference to the justice or injustice of the causes he supported made him the natural adversary of everything Athena represented in terms of disciplined, purposeful military action. The ultimate outcome of the Trojan War cemented Athena's reputation as the preeminent divine mentor of mortal heroes. Yet her guidance extended far beyond the battlefield, encompassing a comprehensive program of heroic development that would shape the greatest champions of the Greek world. Her approach to mentorship was fundamentally different from the patronage offered by other Olympians. Rather than simply enhancing physical strength or bestowing supernatural powers, she emphasized the cultivation of wisdom, strategic thinking, and moral judgment. This methodical approach to heroic development reflected Athena's understanding that enduring greatness required more than momentary divine intervention. It demanded the systematic nurturing of qualities that would allow heroes to overcome challenges through their own enhanced capabilities. Perseus, the legendary slayer of the Gorgon Medusa, became one of her most celebrated protégés through a collaboration that demonstrated Athena's mastery of both strategic planning and practical problem-solving. When the young hero was confronted with the seemingly impossible task demanded by King Polydectes to bring back the head of Medusa as a wedding gift, he faced a challenge that was not merely physical, but metaphysical. He knew well that a direct confrontation with the Gorgon meant instant death, for anyone foolish enough to meet her gaze would be turned immediately to stone. This challenge required not just courage or brute strength, but innovative thinking and specialized equipment that no mortal craftsman could provide. Athena's intervention began with a careful analysis of the specific difficulties Perseus would face in approaching and defeating the monster. The Gorgon's deadly gaze represented the primary obstacle, a defense that required a solution allowing Perseus to locate and strike his target without ever looking directly at her. The goddess realized that traditional mirrors made of polished metal would be insufficient, lacking the clarity and reliability needed for precise combat maneuvers in the dim, enclosed space of Medusa's lair. The reflective shield Athena provided to Perseus represented a masterpiece of divine craftsmanship. Its bronze surface was polished to a mirror-like brilliance that exceeded anything achievable by mortal techniques. The shield's convex shape provided a wide-angle view, allowing Perseus to maintain a safe distance from the Gorgon's direct line of sight while still observing her movements and position with perfect clarity. The bronze had been treated with divine processes to eliminate the distortions and imperfections that plagued ordinary mirrors, offering Perseus a reflection so crisp and accurate that he could deliver precise sword strikes while moving backward or sideways to avoid accidental visual contact. Beyond its practical utility as a reflective surface, Athena's shield incorporated enchanted wards to protect the hero from the other dangers he might encounter during his quest. The bronze surface was capable of deflecting not only physical attacks from the Gorgon's claws and fangs, but potentially even turning aside the metaphysical weight of her petrifying gaze if it were caught in the reflection. The weight of the shield was carefully balanced to provide maximum protection without hindering Perseus's mobility. Knowing that success would depend as much on rapid maneuvering as on striking power, Athena's strategic counsel to Perseus went far beyond the mere provision of equipment. It encompassed comprehensive tactical guidance covering every aspect of the mission, from the approach to the escape. The goddess explained the geography of the island where the Gorgons dwelt, identifying the most advantageous approach routes that would minimize the risk of detection, while maximizing his tactical options once the engagement began. She provided detailed intelligence regarding Medusa's habits and behavioral patterns, allowing Perseus to time his assault for maximum effect, striking when the monster was most vulnerable. The counsel bestowed by the grey-eyed goddess upon the hero Perseus extended far beyond the mere provision of enchanted armaments. It constituted a masterclass in the lethal arts of indirect perception and the discipline of the mind. Athena's instruction included highly specific, almost surgical technical directives on how to sever the Gorgon's head from her wretched shoulders while remaining immune to the petrifying horror of her gaze. She emphasized with chilling clarity that once the assault commenced, there could be no room for the slightest tremor of hesitation. The strike had to be executed with the speed of a falling lightning bolt and the precision of a diamond cutter. Perseus was compelled to master the unnatural and disorienting skill of coordinating his sword strokes solely through the reversed, distorted world reflected upon the polished bronze surface of his shield. He had to learn to fight a phantom image while striking a physical reality, a technique that contradicted every instinct of traditional combat and demanded a mental discipline as rigid and unyielding as the metal that protected him. The mentorship of Athena expanded to encompass the profound psychological fortification necessary to confront such an eldritch abomination. She ensured that Perseus understood that his victory would not stem from the total suppression of his innate fear, but rather from the alchemical transmutation of that terror into a state of heightened, supernatural awareness. The goddess initiated him into ancient techniques of meditation and mental focus, methods designed to keep the intellect crystal clear even when confronted with the sanity-shattering reality of Medusa's presence. She knew, with the cold certainty of divine foresight, that in the dank serpentine lair of the Gorgon, a single moment of panic or a heartbeat of indecision would result in absolute stony catastrophe. Furthermore, the goddess provided Perseus with vital intelligence regarding the terrors that lurked in the shadows of Medusa's lair, her two immortal sisters, Stheno and Euryale. Unlike Medusa, whose mortality was her one vulnerability, these ancient siblings possessed an undying nature that rendered them immune to conventional slaughter. Athena's strategic planning therefore included a meticulous choreography of escape, detailing the precise routes and timings required for Perseus to vanish into the ether before the surviving Gorgons could organize an effective pursuit. She also instructed him on the dual nature of his grisly prize, explaining how the severed head of Medusa would function as both a trophy of supreme victory and a weapon of apocalyptic power. She warned him gravely that the head retained its capacity to turn flesh to stone even after death, a grim reminder that some powers are too terrible to be extinguished by the mere cessation of life. The successful completion of this harrowing quest by Perseus established the perfect archetype for Athena's approach to heroic mentorship, a methodology that seamlessly blended practical material assistance with high-level strategic guidance and deep psychological conditioning. Her support enabled Perseus to achieve a feat that raw courage or martial skill alone could never have surmounted. Yet her aid required that the hero be more than a passive vessel for divine power. He was forced to evolve, to develop new faculties of perception, and to exercise extraordinary judgment under the crushing weight of mortal peril. This collaborative dynamic became the hallmark of Athena's relationships with mortals, distinguishing her subtle, empowering guidance from the heavy-handed interventions of other deities who often reduced their champions to mere pawns. In stark contrast to the martial harmony of her bond with Perseus, the complex and tragic saga of Athena and the Lydian weaver Arachne illuminated a different facet of the goddess's character, revealing the perilous boundaries that separate the mortal from the divine. Arachne possessed a talent for the textile arts so sublime, so utterly transcendent that the tapestries and garments she wove possessed a beauty and technical perfection that defied human understanding. Observers, entranced by the fluidity of her threads and the vibrancy of her dyes, began to whisper that her work rivaled, or perhaps even surpassed, the creations of Athena herself. Initially, such comparisons might have pleased the goddess, who took a motherly pride in those mortals who achieved excellence under her patronage of the crafts. However, Arachne's response to this acclaim revealed deep, jagged fissures in her character, transforming her from a promising prodigy into a cautionary tale regarding the corrosive nature of excessive pride. Rather than acknowledging the divine spark or the gift of talent bestowed by the gods, Arachne boldly claimed that her skills were the sole product of her own toil, superior to anything the immortals could fashion. By openly declaring that she could defeat Athena in a contest of the loom, she exhibited that most dangerous of mortal failings known to the Greeks as hubris, a spiritual arrogance that dares to challenge the cosmic order. Athena's initial reaction to this insolence demonstrated her preference for education over retribution. She did not strike immediately, but sought to correct. Cloaking her radiant divinity in the guise of a withered silver-haired crone, the goddess visited Arachne's workshop. In this humble form, she offered the weaver gentle but ominous counsel regarding the perils of comparing oneself to the everlasting gods. This intervention offered Arachne a final, merciful opportunity to recant her boasts and display the appropriate humility before her vanity invited disaster. The disguised goddess praised Arachne's technical mastery, but subtly implied that true genius requires the recognition of the celestial sources that make human achievement possible. Athena's advice underscored the fundamental truth that while mortals may reach for greatness, they must maintain a respectful reverence for the powers that grant them the capacity to create. This balanced perspective reflected Athena's belief that the relationship between gods and men should be built on mutual respect, not on slavish fear or arrogant independence. When Arachne scornfully rejected this wisdom and doubled down on her claims of superiority, Athena was compelled to cast aside her disguise and accept the formal challenge. The decision to engage in a direct competition with a mortal represented a significant deviation from her usual indirect methods, but Arachne's public declarations had created a crisis of authority that could not be ignored. The contest became a necessity, not merely to prove Athena's superior skill, but to re-establish the correct understanding of the hierarchy between divine inspiration and human execution. The weaving contest that followed was a spectacle of unparalleled artistry, yet it also laid bare the fundamental differences in how the two competitors approached the act of creation. Athena's loom sang with the music of cosmic order. Her tapestry depicted the majesty of the Olympian gods in all their glory, centering on the scene of her own victory over Poseidon for the patronage of Athens, a visual argument for the triumph of wisdom over brute force. Surrounding this central motif were cautionary vignettes depicting the tragic fates of mortals who had dared to challenge the gods, weaving a comprehensive visual argument about the necessity of humility. The technical execution of Athena's work surpassed anything ever beheld in the mortal realm. Her threads seemed to shimmer with living light, creating images that appeared to move and breathe, the colours possessing a depth that no earthly dye could replicate. Arachne's tapestry, while technically flawless, was a manifesto of rebellion. Her shuttle flew with a furious, seditious energy, weaving scenes that highlighted the moral failings and scandals of the gods. She depicted Zeus in his various deceptive guises seducing mortal women, Poseidon's violent moods, and the hypocrisies of the divine court. The artistic quality of her work was undeniable. In terms of texture, composition, and realism, it stood as a peer to Athena's own creation, proving that mortal skill could indeed scale the heights of divine perfection. Yet, the spirit imbued within the cloth was poisonous. It was not a celebration of art, but a weapon of critique, a deliberate insult woven in silk and gold. Athena's reaction to Arachne's finished masterpiece was a complex storm of admiration and wrath. She could not deny the perfection of the work, but neither could she abide the spirit of insolence that animated it. The transformation of Arachne into a spider was not merely a punishment, but an act of poetic justice that preserved the weaver's talent while stripping away the humanity that had been corrupted by pride. As a spider, Arachne would continue to weave webs of intricate geometric beauty for all eternity, possessing the same technical mastery she'd held as a woman. However, in this new, chitinous form, her voice was silenced, and her ability to challenge the gods or inspire arrogance in others was forever neutralized. The tale of Arachne became a potent instrument of Athena's teaching, illustrating that while the gods do not fear human excellence, they demand that it be tempered with the wisdom to know one's place in the grand design. The goddess's involvement in the saga of Jason and the Argonauts demonstrated yet another dimension of her power, her capacity to facilitate large-scale cooperative endeavours while maintaining her focus on practical problem-solving. The quest to retrieve the Golden Fleece from the distant barbarian lands of Colchis represented one of the most ambitious undertakings in the history of heroism, requiring not just individual bravery, but the coordinated effort of the greatest champions of the age. The construction of the Argo, the legendary vessel that would carry these heroes across the treacherous seas, provided Athena with the perfect canvas to display her mastery of naval architecture and her understanding of the intricate requirements of such a voyage. It was Athena who guided the hands of the shipwright Argus, ensuring that the timbers were hewn and fitted with a precision that defied the rough standards of the time. But her contribution went far deeper than mere carpentry. In a moment of supreme magic, Athena brought a bough from the sacred prophetic oaks of Dodona and fitted it into the prow of the ship. This act endowed the Argo with a semblance of sentience, the ability to speak and offer counsel to the crew in their darkest hours. Thus, Athena did not just help build a ship, she created a living instrument of exploration, ensuring that even in the farthest reaches of the unknown, the heroes would carry with them a splinter of divine wisdom to guide their way. In the construction of the Argo, the vessel destined to carry Jason and his band of Argonauts upon their perilous odyssey, the role of Athena was not limited to that of a distant muse, whispering inspiration from the clouds. Rather, she laboured as the active, divine architect of the enterprise, immersing herself in the very dust and sawdust of creation. The goddess worked in such intimate collaboration with the master shipwright Argos that she melded the artisan's natural mortal talents with her own celestial guidance, birthing a craft that transcended the known boundaries of traditional shipbuilding while remaining ruthlessly practical for the trials of the open ocean. The contributions of the grey-eyed goddess to the design of the Argo addressed both the immediate tangible necessities of a long voyage and the unique supernatural tribulations the heroes were destined to face in their quest for the Golden Fleece. The vessel was required to be of sufficient grandeur and capacity to house 50 of the greatest heroes of the Greek world, along with the immense stores of provisions needed for such an extended campaign. Yet it also needed to possess the agility to perform nimble manoeuvres amidst the treacherous currents of unknown seas and the chaos of potential naval skirmishes. The design that sprang from the mind of the goddess achieved this delicate equilibrium through an innovative hull construction that maximised internal volume without sacrificing the structural integrity required to withstand the crushing embrace of the deep ocean. Yet, the divine craftsmanship Athena wove into the Argo brought with it a host of enchanted attributes that would prove vital to the expedition's survival. The keel of the ship was hewn from a sacred oak tree taken from the grove of the oracle at Dodona, a wood imbued with the ancient magic of the earth. This gift granted the vessel the power of prophecy, transforming the Argo into a living, breathing and speaking entity, capable of guiding her crew through the darkest and most critical moments of their journey. This integration of divine wisdom into the very skeletal structure of the ship reflected Athena's profound understanding that true success relies not merely upon courage and seamanship, but upon the possession of right judgment and timely knowledge. The sails of the Argo stood as another brilliant testament to Athena's innovative approach to solving practical problems through divine artifice. The canvas was woven using techniques the goddess had developed specifically for this endeavour, resulting in a material that was lighter than seafoam yet stronger than any traditional sailcloth known to man. Furthermore, this miraculous fabric incorporated specific geometric patterns designed to capture and channel the power of the wind with supernatural efficiency. This advanced aerodynamic design allowed the Argo to achieve speeds and manoeuvrability far surpassing any vessel of comparable size, granting the heroes critical tactical advantages that would mean the difference between life and death on the high seas. Athena's guidance extended far beyond the physical construction of the ship, encompassing the strategic planning of the voyage itself and the specific challenges the Argonauts would face in their pursuit of the prize. The goddess provided Jason with detailed intelligence regarding the route to Colchis, including the location of treacherous straits, potential sources of resupply, and the intricate political landscapes of the various kingdoms the expedition would encounter. This process illuminated Athena's nature not merely as a warrior, but as a logistical and strategic genius without peer. The relationship between Athena and Heracles, the greatest of all Greek heroes, stands as perhaps the most perfect example of how the goddess could provide effective support even to those whose approach to problem-solving differed radically from her own. Heracles embodied the application of overwhelming physical force against seemingly impossible odds, relying primarily on his divine lineage and his earth-shattering muscular strength to obliterate obstacles that would have annihilated ordinary mortals. This approach stood in stark, jagged contrast to Athena's emphasis on strategic thought and calculated innovation, creating a potential ground for conflict between the patroness and her protégé. However, in her infinite wisdom, Athena recognized that the exceptional power of Heracles, when properly directed and supported, could achieve results that pure intellect alone could never realize. The mentorship of the goddess focused on helping Heracles discern when the application of direct force was appropriate, and when alternative, more cerebral approaches would yield superior results. Her guidance cultivated within the hero the judgment necessary to distinguish between problems requiring brute strength and those demanding a subtler touch. During Heracles' confrontation with the Nemean lion, a beast of nightmare whose enchanted hide was impervious to all mortal weapons, Athena's aid took the form of strategic counsel rather than direct intervention. She helped Heracles comprehend that the creature's invulnerability rendered traditional methods of attack utterly futile. This realization forced him to abandon tactics that relied solely on force and to devise a new stratagem that utilized his strength in a novel way. It was the whispered guidance of Athena that led Heracles to the realization that only the lion's own razor-sharp claws were capable of piercing its hide, a brilliant solution that allowed him to skin the beast and claim the legendary armor that would protect him in his future labors. The cleaning of the Augean stables presented Heracles with a challenge that could not be solved by muscle alone. The sheer volume of the filth demanded innovative thinking and an understanding of hydraulic principles that exceeded the hero's natural expertise. Athena's guidance allowed Heracles to perceive that diverting the courses of two nearby rivers to wash through the stables was a far more efficient solution than any manual attempt to clear the waste. Despite his extraordinary physical capabilities, this labour served as a striking demonstration of how divine wisdom could multiply the effectiveness of physical effort through intelligent application. In the case of the Stymphalian birds, Athena's support demonstrated her willingness to provide specialized equipment when the circumstances demanded capabilities that could not be developed through training or strategy alone. The bronze castanets, or crotala, which she bestowed upon the hero, allowed Heracles to generate a noise so deafening and specific that it flushed the monstrous birds from the sanctuary of the marsh, where traditional weapons could not reach them. This intervention showed that the goddess understood that effective mentorship sometimes requires direct assistance, while still maintaining the principle that heroes must achieve their tasks primarily through their own enhanced abilities. This collaborative dynamic between Athena and Heracles established important precedents for how divine wisdom and mortal strength could work in concert to achieve outcomes neither could accomplish in isolation. The goddess's guidance helped Heracles evolve beyond his initial reliance on brute force, transforming him into a more complete, well-rounded hero capable of adapting his approach to suit the nature of the challenge. This development reflected Athena's broader philosophy of education, which emphasized not just the completion of tasks, but the growth and maturation of the individual. The transformation of Athena from a figure of distant mythology into the living heart of Athenian religious and civic life reached its fullest expression in the classical period, where the worship of the goddess became inextricably woven into the city's identity and political structure. The cult of Athena in classical Athens carried a significance that extended far beyond traditional religious observances. It constituted a comprehensive system of rituals, festivals, and daily practices that reinforced social cohesion, celebrated civic values, and maintained the spiritual bond between the goddess and her chosen city. This complex religious framework had evolved through centuries of refinement, incorporating elements of archaic tradition while adapting to the changing needs of an increasingly sophisticated urban society. The Panathenaia festival stood as the supreme and most magnificent celebration in honour of Athena, transforming the city every 4 years into the stage for the most elaborate display of religious devotion in the Greek world. The roots of the festival reached back into the mists of Athens' earliest history, but by the 6th century before the Common Era, it had evolved into a comprehensive celebration spanning several days and involving nearly every segment of Athenian society. The festival served multiple functions simultaneously. It honoured the protectress of the city, demonstrated Athens' prosperity and cultural sophistication to foreign visitors, and provided citizens with opportunities to participate in shared religious experiences that reinforced their common identity. The Great Panathenaia, celebrated every 4 years, was distinguished from the annual Lesser Panathenaia by its expanded programme of events and the immense international attention it attracted. The festival commenced with preliminary rites that prepared both the city and its inhabitants for the main celebrations. These preparatory rituals included purification ceremonies for the participants, the adornment of public spaces with garlands and tapestries, and the organisation of the various groups that would partake in the grand procession that formed the centrepiece of the festival. The procession itself represented one of the most carefully orchestrated public events of the ancient world, involving hundreds of participants arranged in a specific order that reflected both religious significance and social hierarchy. The cortege began at the Dipylon Gate, the main entrance to Athens, and followed the Panathenaic Way through the bustling agora before beginning the steep ascent up the slopes of the Acropolis toward the Parthenon. This route was paved with marble blocks specifically to provide a surface worthy of the ceremonial march, while the buildings lining the path were decked in banners and temporary structures to enhance the visual impact of the parade. At the very vanguard of the procession walked the young men of Athens, chosen for their physical perfection and moral character, bearing olive branches to symbolize their devotion to the goddess and wearing crowns of myrtle. These selected youths, who often bore titles such as kanaphoroi when carrying sacred baskets and ritual implements, played vital roles in the ceremonies. They represented the future of Athenian society, and their prominent position in the procession emphasized the community's investment in the next generation. Their selection required proof not only of physical beauty and athletic prowess, but also of good standing and family reputation, ensuring that those who led the procession embodied the values the Athenians associated with their patroness. Following the young men came the representatives of the various crafts and professions. Each guild carried the tools and products of their trade to demonstrate how Athena's patronage benefited every aspect of economic life. Potters displayed their most exquisite ceramics, metalworkers bore their finest examples of bronze and silver craftsmanship, and weavers presented textiles that showcased the techniques Athena had taught to mortals. These professional groups wore distinctive attire that identified their expertise while maintaining the general dignity appropriate for a religious procession. The sacrificial animals, cattle, sheep and goats adorned with ribbons and garlands, formed another vital element of the procession as they were led toward their ceremonial destiny. The selection of these animals required careful attention to their physical condition and appearance, for only flawless specimens were deemed suitable for offering to the goddess. The cattle reserved for the great sacrifice at the Parthenon were magnificent beasts, chosen specifically for their size, colour and freedom from any physical defect that might render them unacceptable to Athena. Musicians and singers provided an auditory accompaniment to the visual spectacle, performing hymns and songs of victory composed specifically for the occasion. their melodies drifting up toward the high peaks of Olympus. The musicians and singers wove an auditory spell over this visual feast, performing hymns composed specifically for this sacred epoch, and songs of victory adapted from the deepest wells of traditional religious observance. The musical program extended far beyond mere instrumental pieces performed on the vibrating strings of lyres, the haunting breath of flutes, and the rhythmic pulse of drums. It encompassed the soaring, polyphonic works sung by trained choirs representing the various ages and social strata of the city. These musical elements served a purpose far greater than merely enriching the ceremonial atmosphere or holding the gathered throngs in a state of reverent awe. They acted as the unseen conductor of the procession itself. The unifying power of the rhythm ensured that the movement of that colossal parade remained coordinated, allowing thousands of participants to maintain the appropriate tempo and distance as they flowed like a river of humanity toward the high sanctuary. Yet the emotional and spiritual zenith of the Panathenaia procession was, without question, the presentation of the peplos, that sacred garment destined for the goddess herself. This offering stood as the tangible embodiment of the community's collective devotion to their protectress, achieved through the creation and dedication of the most complex and painstaking textile craftsmanship known to the ancient world. The peplos was far more than a simple garment. It was a woven prayer, a masterpiece of the loom that demanded months of arduous preparation, and represented the combined skills of Athens' most dexterous textile artisans. The creation of each new peplos commenced immediately following the conclusion of the previous festival, ensuring that the 4-year cycle of production allowed sufficient time for the meticulous labour required by this intricate and holy artefact. The peplos itself possessed colossal dimensions, measuring approximately 12 feet by 18 feet, a size that allowed it to serve as a ceremonial robe for the gigantic olive wood statue of Athena, or in later times for the monumental gold and ivory statue housed within the dim, sanctified halls of the Parthenon. The foundational fabric of the garment was woven from the finest wool available, dyed to that deep, mystical shade of saffron yellow that had become traditional for this sacred vestment. The weaving process demanded the flawless coordination of numerous skilled workers labouring under the eagle-eyed supervision of a master weaver, who ensured absolute consistency in tension, pattern, and colour across the vast expanse of the textile. The decorative elements adorning the peplos represented the most sophisticated textile art produced in the classical world, incorporating techniques that pushed the boundaries of what was thought possible with the materials and tools of the age. The central design woven into the fabric typically depicted scenes from the mythology of Athena, most notably her miraculous birth from the head of Zeus, and her triumph over the giants during the cosmic war known as the Gigantomachy. These narrative scenes were created through a combination of weaving techniques and embroidery that achieved effects comparable to the finest painted pottery or metalwork of the era. The borders of the peplos featured intricate geometric patterns interlaced with symbolic elements and smaller mythological vignettes that reinforced the religious significance of the garment. The proper execution of these decorative borders required extraordinary skill, involving the use of multicoloured threads and complex pattern work that had to be coordinated along the entire perimeter of the massive textile. These geometric elements contained innovations reflecting contemporary artistic developments, while simultaneously drawing deep nourishment from traditional Greek design motifs. The actual presentation of the peplos during the procession involved an elaborate staging designed to maximise its visual impact while maintaining the appropriate religious solemnity. As it moved through the city, the sacred garment was suspended from a specially constructed frame, allowing it to be displayed vertically, creating the impression of a giant banner or a sail filled by the wind. This frame was mounted upon a wheeled platform capable of navigating the streets, while providing stable support for the precious textile, ensuring that the peplos was displayed properly throughout the long winding journey from the Diplon Gate to the high slopes of the Acropolis. The team charged with the responsibility of transporting the peplos included technical experts who managed the mechanical aspects of moving the display frame, as well as religious officials who ensured that the proper ritual protocols were observed throughout the process. The selection of these individuals required a careful evaluation of their technical competence, their physical strength, and their religious standing within the community. Their coordinated efforts were vital for the successful completion of one of the most logistically complex elements of the entire festival. Deep within the inner sanctum of this cultic life stood the Araphoroi, representing one of the most distinctive and mysterious aspects of the cult of Athena in classical Athens. These figures embody the connection of the goddess to the feminine aspects of religious life, guarding sacred secrets that have never been fully revealed to the modern understanding. Chosen from the most aristocratic Athenian families while they were between the tender ages of 7 and 11, these young priestesses served Athena for approximately 1 year, living upon the Acropolis in close proximity to the goddess's most holy precincts. The selection process for the Araphoroi involved a meticulous assessment of the candidates' family histories, personal characters, and physical conditions, ensuring that only the most suitable maidens were chosen for this prestigious divine service. The family of a selected Araphoros gained considerable social status from their daughter's service, yet they also assumed significant financial responsibilities for her maintenance and for the costs associated with the various ritual activities she would perform during her tenure. The daily lives of the Araphoroi revolved around their residence in a special building upon the Acropolis, constructed specifically for their housing and ritual activities. This structure provided living quarters befitting their aristocratic backgrounds, while maintaining the state of isolation from ordinary social contact that their religious duties demanded. The building contained workshops where the girls engaged in textile production, particularly the weaving and embroidery that formed a central part of their service to Athena. The most significant responsibility of the Araphoroi involved their participation in the creation of the peplos prepared for the Panathenaia. They laboured under the supervision of experienced weavers to master the complex techniques required for this sacred textile. Their participation in the production of the peplos served both practical and educational purposes, ensuring the transmission of the skills necessary for the creation of these elaborate garments to future generations while instructing the young priestesses in the crafts patronised by Athena. The mysterious night ceremony known as the Araphoria represented the most intimate and secretive aspect of the Araphoroi's service, involving ritual activities that were never fully documented and remain largely unknown to modern scholars. The ceremony took place in the dead of night, with the young priestesses carrying covered baskets containing unknown objects from the Acropolis down through a secret subterranean passage to a sanctuary of Aphrodite located on the north slope of the hill. The contents of the baskets were never revealed, and the girls themselves swore an oath of eternal silence regarding what they saw and did during the ritual. The underground passage used during the Araphoria represented a remarkable feat of ancient engineering, carved directly into the limestone bedrock of the Acropolis to provide a concealed route between the summit and the sanctuary below. The passage was wide enough to allow the young priestesses to proceed safely while carrying their sacred burdens, yet narrow enough to maintain the secrecy essential to the efficacy of the ritual. The construction of this passage required a significant investment of resources, demonstrating the importance the Athenians placed on maintaining the proper performance of their most sacred ceremonies. The symbolic significance of the Araphoria has been a subject of extensive academic speculation, with various theories proposed to explain the meaning of the secret ritual and its role in the cult of Athena. Some interpretations suggest that the ceremony represented a reenactment of mythological events related to the goddess's protection of Athens, while others propose that it symbolized the transition from childhood to adulthood or the renewal of the city's sacred relationship with its patron deity. Although the persistent secrecy surrounding the ritual has prevented a definitive understanding of its meaning, its continued performance throughout the classical period attests to its perceived importance for Athenian religious life. The daily worship practices at the temples of Athena across Athens created an unbroken religious rhythm that reinforced the goddess's presence in the lives of ordinary citizens. While the Parthenon served as the focal point for the most elaborate ceremonies, the numerous smaller temples and shrines throughout the city offered opportunities for more intimate forms of worship. These local sanctuaries allowed citizens to establish regular contact with their protective goddess, without the formal procedures and significant expenses associated with the great temple ceremonies. The morning rituals at the Parthenon began before the break of dawn, with the opening of the temple doors and the unveiling of the magnificent gold and ivory cult statue of Athena, created by the sculptor Phidias, and standing nearly 40 feet high, representing one of the most expensive art objects ever created in the ancient world. The gold plating alone on the statue weighed approximately 2,500 pounds, and was constructed in such a manner that it could be disassembled to be weighed. This procedure, performed to verify that none of the precious metal had been pilfered by temple officials, was accompanied by regular maintenance that involved careful cleaning with oil and the application of protective treatments to prevent cracking and discoloration of the ivory parts. The daily offerings presented to Athena included a wide variety of items reflecting both individual devotion and the prosperity of the community. Wealthy citizens might offer elaborate bronze or silver objects, finely woven textiles, or expensive imported goods, while ordinary Athenians presented simpler gifts such as pottery vessels, small bronze figurines, or the first fruits of their agricultural labour. Temple officials kept careful records of these offerings to ensure that the donor's generosity was properly recognised, and to track the accumulation of wealth that enhanced the prestige and resources of the sanctuary. Dwelling within the shadows of the Erechtheion lay the sacred snake, representing one of the most distinctive and eldritch aspects of Athenian religious practice. This creature embodied the ancient chthonic traditions that connected the worship of Athena to the primordial forces associated with the earth itself. Believed to be the guardian spirit of the Acropolis, this serpent was housed in a special chamber within the Erechtheion, where it regularly received offerings of honeyed cakes and was watched over by specialised priests who understood its requirements for care and sustenance. The presence of the snake in the Erechtheion linked the relatively recent arrival of Athena in Athens to the much older religious traditions that had been practised on the Acropolis since prehistoric times. Archaeological evidence suggests that snake worship was established at the site long before the development of anthropomorphic Greek religion, and the incorporation of the sacred snake into the cult of Athena represented a successful synthesis of new and ancient religious practices. This integration helped to ensure a continuity between the different phases of Athenian religious development. The feeding and daily care of this sacred serpent transcended the mundane duties of mere animal husbandry. It evolved into a living seal of legitimacy, a tangible affirmation of the goddess's rightful claim over that holy rock. The appetite of the snake served as a vital barometer for the spiritual health of the city, and a direct indicator of the goddess's continuing favour. The temple guardians, men steeped in the esoteric knowledge of the divine, observed the feeding habits of this reptilian deity with obsessive scrutiny, interpreting the slightest deviation in its hunger as a celestial signal regarding Athena's satisfaction or dissatisfaction with the community's religious observances. There were omens of dread, dark times when the sacred snake refused the honeyed cakes offered to it. Such a refusal was interpreted not as a biological anomaly, but as a terrifying portent of the goddess's wrath or disappointment. These moments precipitated immediate spiritual crises, demanding urgent interventions through additional sacrifices, elaborate purification ceremonies, and a deep introspective examination of recent societal behaviours that might have given offence to the grey-eyed one. The economic magnitude of the cult of Athena extended far beyond the direct costs associated with maintaining the temples and performing the sacred rites. It encompassed a complex, sprawling system of religious commerce that contributed immensely to the prosperity of Athens. Magnificent festivals such as the Panathenæa acted as a powerful lodestone, drawing visitors from the farthest reaches of the Greek world. This influx of pilgrims created a voracious demand for accommodation, sustenance, transportation, and tokens of devotion, thereby opening floodgates of revenue for countless Athenian merchants and innkeepers. The festivals, with their grand athletic competitions, cultural performances, and solemn religious processions, allured both active participants and awestruck spectators, all of whom poured their silver into the city's coffers in exchange for goods and services during their sacred sojourn. The production of votive offerings destined for Athena's sanctuaries supported a thriving industrious sector of the economy, comprised of specialised artisans who dedicated their lives to fashioning bronze figurines, turning clay into exquisite pottery, and weaving textiles of surpassing beauty for religious use. These master craftsmen developed unique styles and techniques that became synonymous with Athenian religious art, creating objects of such high quality that they were sought after by the faithful in every corner of the Mediterranean basin. The city's justified fame for religious craftsmanship enhanced its broader commercial reputation, providing an invaluable contribution to the success of its export industries and spreading the aesthetic influence of Athens alongside its spiritual reach. The social significance of the Athena cult in maintaining the civic identity of Athens manifested in myriad ways, reinforcing community membership and social cohesion through shared religious participation. Attendance at the great festivals required citizens to labour together in organised committees, to contribute their resources, and to fulfill various ceremonial roles that transcended the usual rigid boundaries of social class and economic status. These collaborative efforts forged bonds of steel between citizens who might otherwise have had little contact, nurturing that shared sense of identity and common destiny that was absolutely essential for the functioning of a democratic state. The cult's emphasis on wisdom, strategic thought, and skilled craftsmanship provided the ideological bedrock for Athens' political and cultural values, distinguishing the city from its rivals and imbuing its people with a sense of superior purpose. The renown of Athens for intellectual achievement, artistic excellence, and democratic innovation aligned perfectly with the attributes the Athenians ascribed to their patron goddess, creating a mutually reinforcing relationship between religious faith and civic pride. The belief in the goddess's protection validated Athens' claims to cultural supremacy, while the tangible achievements of the Athenians served as concrete proof to potential allies and admirers throughout the Greek world of the benefits conferred by such divine patronage. This religious fervour, which permeated every stratum of Athenian society, found its most resplendent architectural expression in the Parthenon, constructed between the years 447 and 432 before the Common Era. This project represented far more than the mere erection of a temple. It was the creation of the ultimate and most potent declaration of Athens' devotion to its protectress. Under the leadership of Pericles, a statesman who understood profoundly that great cities require great monuments to reflect their ambitions and visions, Athens embarked upon the most expensive and technically demanding construction project in the entirety of Greek history. The decision to raise the Parthenon was born from a complex intersection of religious obligations, political necessities, and the cultural ambition of a city that had emerged from the ashes of the Persian Wars as the dominant power of the Aegean world. The financing of the Parthenon relied heavily on the tributes and taxes collected from the city-states allied with Athens through the Delian League, a bold and audacious appropriation of funds that sparked significant controversy both within the walls of Athens and among its restless allies. The annual tribute, amounting to approximately 460 talents of silver, provided the colossal financial foundation necessary for such an ambitious enterprise. However, the diversion of these funds from military war chests to architectural marvels required a political acumen and power of persuasion that only a leader of Pericles' stature could command. He justified this lavish expenditure by arguing that the construction would provide employment for the citizens of Athens, while simultaneously creating an enduring monument to the collective achievements of the Greek world in their resistance against Persian tyranny. The selection of the highest point of the Acropolis for the new temple necessitated the clearing of the melancholy ruins of an earlier structure, known as the Older Parthenon, which had been destroyed during the Persian sack of the city in the year 480 before the Common Era. The debris of this predecessor served as practical building material for the new foundations, but also established a symbolic continuity with the devotion of previous generations. The architects Titaness and Callicrates were tasked with developing innovations that would set new standards for Greek architectural achievement, incorporating elements from the destroyed temple into their revolutionary design. For the construction of the Parthenon, the builders selected Pentelic marble, quarried from the flanks of Mount Pentelicus, located approximately 10 miles to the northeast of Athens. They extracted a staggering quantity of stone, weighing approximately 13,400 tons. This specific marble was chosen for its extraordinary quality, its fine, crystalline texture, and the unique property it possessed of acquiring a soft, golden patina over time, a characteristic that would give the building its legendary glowing appearance under the Mediterranean sun. The transportation of such immense quantities of stone required the development of specialized equipment and logistical techniques, including heavy-duty wagons capable of bearing blocks weighing several tons, and the improvement of the roads connecting the quarries to the construction site to handle the relentless traffic of the stone haulers. The preparation of the temple's foundation demanded extensive work on the bedrock of the Acropolis. The irregular limestone surfaces had to be levelled with surgical precision to create a flawlessly horizontal platform capable of supporting the crushing weight of the marble superstructure. The foundation blocks, some weighing more than 10 tons, were fitted together with such extreme precision that no mortar was required to maintain the structural integrity of the base. The joints between the blocks were secured with iron clamps and dowels, and to prevent corrosion and provide additional security against the tremors of the earth, molten lead was poured into the channels surrounding the metal, sealing the structure against the ravages of time and nature. The architectural design of the Parthenon incorporated subtle mathematical refinements that corrected optical illusions, creating visual effects that enhanced the building's appearance of perfection. The stylobate, or the platform upon which the columns stood, featured a slight upward curvature. Without this modification, the long horizontal lines would appear to the human eye to sag in the middle. This curve, rising approximately 4 inches in the centre of the long sides and 2.5 inches on the short sides, required extraordinary precision in the cutting and placement of the foundation blocks to achieve the desired effect. The columns of the temple displayed a similar mathematical sophistication through the use of entasis, a slight swelling in the shaft of the column designed to counteract the optical illusion that causes perfectly straight parallel lines to appear concave when viewed from a distance. Each column tapered as it rose from the ground, but incorporated this gentle bulge at approximately 1/3 of its height, ensuring that to the observer standing on the ground, the proportions appeared flawlessly straight and strong. The calculation and execution of these subtleties demanded advanced mathematical knowledge and exceptional craftsmanship from the stonemasons responsible for shaping each individual block. The Parthenon featured a total of 46 outer columns of the Doric order, each standing approximately 34 feet high, with a diameter of 6 feet at the base. Each column was constructed from multiple marble drums, typically 11 or 12 separate pieces, fitted together with precision and secured with iron dowels centered in the stone. The fluting of the columns, the 20 concave grooves running the entire length of the shaft, was carved only after the drums had been assembled and placed in their final position. This ensured that the decorative vertical lines maintained perfect alignment across the joints between the separate stones. Within this architectural masterpiece stood the Athena Parthenos, the colossal statue created by Phidias from gold and ivory, a technique known as chryselephantine. This statue represented the ultimate achievement in ancient Greek religious sculpture, combining unprecedented artistic ambition with technical innovation on a scale never before attempted. Standing approximately 38 feet high within the inner chamber, or cella, of the Parthenon, the statue's massive scale was designed to inspire awe and to demonstrate the overwhelming wealth and devotion of the Athenian people. The construction of this masterpiece required the collaboration of a legion of experts, including ivory carvers, goldsmiths, bronze workers, and structural engineers who solved the complex technical challenges involved in creating such a massive composite figure. The skeleton of the statue consisted of a wooden armature constructed from carefully selected timber, providing the necessary structural support for the precious materials that would form the visible surfaces. Cypress wood was preferred for this internal framework due to its natural resistance to insects and decay. The design of the framework included adjustable elements capable of tolerating the expansion and contraction of the different materials in response to changes in temperature and humidity. The engineering of this internal structure required a profound understanding of both sculptural requirements and architectural principles, as it had to remain stable while supporting its own significant weight and the added burden of the gold and ivory cladding. The ivory portions of the Athena Parthenos, including the goddess's face, arms, and other areas of exposed skin, were carved from elephant tusks imported from Africa through the vast trade networks of Egypt and Phoenicia. The procurement of sufficient ivory for such a colossal project represented a significant logistical challenge, requiring the coordination of numerous suppliers and the stockpiling of raw materials over a long period. The ivory had to be selected with the utmost care for quality and size. The largest pieces were reserved for the most prominent areas of the statue, where joints between different tusks would be most visible. The preparation of the ivory for sculptural use involved complex processes including cleaning, shaping, and treating the material to prevent cracking or discoloration over the centuries. The natural tendency of ivory to split along its grain lines required careful planning in the placement of joints and the orientation of individual pieces within the overall composition. The carvers developed specialized techniques using dowels, glues, and mechanical fasteners to join separate pieces of ivory, ensuring that the connections remained invisible in the finished work while providing the structural integrity necessary for long-term preservation. The golden elements of the statue, comprising approximately 2,500 pounds of pure metal, were hammered into thin sheets, carefully shaped, and attached to the wooden framework to form Athena's garments and accessories. This gold was designed to be removable, allowing it to be weighed to prove no theft had occurred, and serving as a sacred treasury for the city in times of desperate need. The golden skin that sheathed this colossus was not merely applied, but birthed through the delicate and arduous art of repoussé, where the precious metal was hammered from the reverse side to create reliefs of breathtaking depth and dimension. This technique allowed the goddess's divine attributes to be rendered with a realism that seemed to pulse with life. The helmet resting upon Athena's brow bore the likenesses of sphinxes and griffins, those legendary eldritch guardians of the unknown, while the aegis upon her breast displayed the severed head of the Gorgon Medusa in terrifying detail, surrounded by a fringe of writhing golden serpents. The design of these golden plates and ornaments, constructed to be removable from the underlying structure, served a purpose that transcended mere artistic preference. It fulfilled a function that was simultaneously practical and deeply political. This ingenious feature granted the temple authorities the ability to periodically dismantle the golden skin and weigh it, thereby proving to the populace that not a single dram of the sacred metal had been pilfered, and thus validating their own integrity through a ritual of absolute transparency. This ceremony of weighing was far more than a bureaucratic audit. It was a theatrical renewal of public trust, transforming into a dramatic spectacle where the material wealth of the city and the spiritual value of the goddess were displayed in separate, blindingly glorious parts. The colossal shield, resting firmly within Athena's left hand, bore intricate relief decorations that forged an eternal, visual bond between the divine protection of the goddess and the mortal political leadership of the city. Here, amidst the swirling chaos of mythological battles, the artist Phidias had dared to carve the portraits of contemporary Athenian leaders, placing them shoulder to shoulder with legends. The inclusion of Pericles himself among the figures upon the shield was a choice of staggering boldness, an artistic assertion that linked the architect of Athens' golden age directly to the city's celestial patron. The outer surface of this great shield depicted the Amazonomachy, that ancient and bloody struggle between the Greeks and the warrior women of the East, while the concave inner surface revealed the Gigantomachy, the cosmic war where the Olympian gods cast down the earthborn giants, symbolizing the eternal victory of civilization over raw, primal chaos. Even the pedestal beneath the Athena Parthenos was not left bare. It supported the massive figure while expanding the statue's symbolic narrative through additional sculptural elements. The relief panel circling the base portrayed the birth of Pandora, the first woman forged by the gods, thereby connecting Athena's role as the patroness of crafts to the profound theme of divine gifts bestowed upon humanity. The technical execution of these bas reliefs matched the artistic perfection of the main statue, ensuring a flawless visual continuity that flowed from the floor of the temple to the crest of the goddess's helmet. To the north of the Parthenon, upon the sacred rock of the Acropolis, rose the Erechtheion, constructed between the years 421 and 406 before the Common Era. This structure served as the holiest of holies within Athenian religious practice, a reliquary of ancient cult objects, and a guardian of traditions that predated Athena's arrival in the city by centuries. Unlike the unified, symmetrical majesty of the Parthenon, the Erechtheion was a complex multi-level sanctuary designed to house a multitude of religious functions within a single, irregular footprint. Its unconventional plan was a brilliant architectural response to the need to incorporate several pre-existing sacred spots without disturbing the holy ground, preserving the delicate relationships between the different cults that shared the space. The most renowned feature of this temple, the Porch of the Caryatids, replaced traditional columns with 6 sculpted female figures, creating one of the most distinctive and imitated elements in the history of art. Each standing approximately 7.5 feet tall, these marble maidens were carved with such supreme mastery that they appeared to bear the crushing weight of the stone entablature upon their heads with effortless grace. The drapery of their tunics was rendered with an extraordinary attention to the natural fall and fold of fabric, creating a sense of fluidity and solid stone. Their posture suggested not the static rigidity of architectural supports, but a moment of movement frozen in time. Each caryatid was hewn from a single block of pentelic marble, a feat requiring exceptional skill to maintain the delicate details of their faces, braided hair, and flowing garments while ensuring the structural strength necessary to support the roof of the porch. The functional requirement of bearing this load dictated specific aspects of their design, including the positioning of their arms and the arrangement of their heavy robes to provide maximum stability, the sculptors achieved a remarkable equilibrium between architectural necessity and aesthetic beauty, creating figures that retained their character as young Athenian women while effectively serving as the pillars of the sanctuary. Within the labyrinthine interior of the Erechtheion, the place of highest honour was reserved not for a statue of gold and ivory, but for the ancient wooden image of Athena Polias. This Zoanon, a statue carved from olive wood, and believed by the faithful to have fallen from the very stars in the earliest days of the city, possessed a religious significance that eclipsed even the splendour of Phidias's masterpiece in the Parthenon. The rough, primitive appearance of the wood, blackened by the smoke of centuries of sacrifice, and contrasting sharply with the refined standards of classical sculpture, did not diminish its authority. Rather, its very antiquity served as the ultimate proof of the goddess's primordial presence in Athens. The care and preservation of this ancient wooden idol required specialized knowledge and secret techniques passed down through generations of temple priesthood. The extreme age of the wood and the sanctity of the object made any attempt at restoration or conservation a task of immense delicacy, requiring a careful balance between the physical needs of preservation and the spiritual requirements of the cult. The statue was ritually dressed in the specially woven robes, the sacred peplos, which were renewed at regular intervals. The old garments, having touched the divine form, were treated as holy relics, carefully stored or distributed to those deemed worthy of such a blessing. Residing within the foundations of the Erechtheion was the sacred snake, representing one of the most distinctive aspects of Athenian worship, embodying the chthonic traditions that linked the sky goddess Athena to the primal powers of the earth. The chamber of the serpent within the temple complex was designed to provide a suitable lair for this holy beast, while allowing access for the priests responsible for its care and feeding. The presence of the snake served as a living bridge to the pre-Greek religious traditions of the site, demonstrating how Athena had successfully absorbed the older spiritual practices into her own cult. In the courtyard of the Erechtheion grew the sacred olive tree, guarded by architectural walls that allowed it to drink the sunlight and the rain while protecting it from harm. This tree was revered as the original olive created by Athena during her contest with Poseidon, or at the very least, a direct and miraculous offshoot of that first divine gift. Its location within the temple complex underscored its religious importance, shielding it from the elements, from grazing animals, and from the profane touch of human hands. Beyond the walls of Athens, temples dedicated to Athena dotted the landscape of the Greek world, testifying to her widespread influence while reflecting local variations in worship and architecture. The Temple of Athena Nike, perched upon a bastion at the entrance to the Athenian Acropolis and built between the years 427 and 424 before the Common Era, celebrated the goddess's role in military victory with a compact but elegant Ionic design. Measuring only 27 by 19 feet, the small scale of this temple focused the viewer's attention on its exquisite sculptural decorations and its strategic position overlooking the approach to the citadel. The friezes of the Nike temple broke with tradition by depicting contemporary military victories alongside mythological battles, forging a visual link between the recent triumphs of the Athenian army and the eternal protection of their goddess. The sculptural program included representations of the Battle of Plataea and other conflicts from the Persian Wars, demonstrating how religious art could serve as a historical memorial while maintaining appropriate divine themes. This integration of current events into traditional mythological frameworks reflected a sophisticated understanding of how religious imagery could reinforce political messages. At Delphi, the sanctuary of Athena Paranoia stood prominently below the main complex of Apollo, emphasizing her role as the guardian of holy places and the keeper of divine wisdom. The circular tholos, constructed around the year 380 before the Common Era, formed the centre of this sanctuary and represented one of the finest examples of classical Greek architecture applied to a non-rectangular building. The 20 Doric columns of the tholos supported a conical roof that cut a distinctive silhouette against the mountainous backdrop of Delphi. This temple served pilgrims who sought the guidance of Athena before consulting the oracle of Apollo, acknowledging her wisdom as the necessary complement to his prophetic powers. The treasuries within her sanctuary housed offerings from various Greek city-states, seeking Athena's protection for their military campaigns and civic enterprises. These treasuries demonstrated the goddess's international appeal, creating an architectural competition between different communities eager to display their piety and their wealth. On the island of Aegina, the Temple of Athena, dating to approximately the year 500 before the Common Era, showcased early developments in Greek temple sculpture through innovative pediment compositions depicting the Trojan War. The sculptural program illustrated how mythological narratives could be adapted to architectural contexts, emphasizing Athena's central role in the conflict. The figures in the pediments were carved with extraordinary attention to anatomical accuracy and emotional expression, setting artistic standards that would influence generations of Greek sculptors. In Sicily, the Temple of Athena at Syracuse incorporated elements of the early Greek temple into a Christian church during the Byzantine period, creating one of the most remarkable examples of architectural continuity and religious transformation in the Mediterranean world. The original Doric columns were preserved within the fabric of the church, demonstrating how Athena's architectural legacy could survive radical shifts in religious practice and cultural identity. The intellectual revolution that swept through Athens in the 5th and 4th centuries transformed Athena from a primarily religious figure into a central symbol of sophisticated philosophical systems seeking to understand the nature of reality, knowledge, and human existence. Greek philosophers, beginning with the pre-Socratics and reaching full maturity in the works of Plato and Aristotle, found in Athena's traditional attributes a rich source of metaphorical and conceptual material that could illuminate fundamental questions about the relationship between divine wisdom and human understanding. This philosophical appropriation of Athena's symbolism went far beyond simple allegory. It established the goddess as an enduring representation of intellectual virtue and rational inquiry, generating systematic interpretations that would influence Western thought for thousands of years. Plato's engagement with Athena as a philosophical symbol appeared most prominently in his cosmological dialogues, where the goddess served as a representation of the divine intellect operating within the material universe. In the Timaeus, written around the year 360 before the Common Era, Plato offered his most comprehensive account of cosmic creation, describing how a divine craftsman, the demiurge, fashioned the physical world according to eternal mathematical principles. At the very heart of this framework, Athena was envisioned not merely as a deity of Olympus, but as the manifestation of that rational design governing natural processes, the very embodiment of the universal order that the human mind could grasp through philosophical inquiry. Plato described the creation of the world soul as a mathematical harmony, an infinite concord that allowed the cosmos to function as a living, intelligent organism. The association of Athena with this cosmic intelligence reflected not only her traditional role as the goddess of wisdom, but elevated her significance to a universal scale, positioning her as the very essence of existence itself. This philosophical dialogue presents the physical universe not as the accidental debris of chaotic chance, but as the deliberate fruit of rational planning and celestial architecture. In this grand cosmic scheme, Athena emerges as the symbol of that divine intellect which designs and executes the mathematical relationships governing the movements of the stars, the interaction of the elements, and the very emergence of life itself. The miraculous birth of the goddess from the head of Zeus provided Plato with a metaphor of shattering power to understand how divine wisdom manifests within the created order. Just as Athena sprang from the intellect of the supreme god fully formed, clad in armour, and complete in her wisdom, so too did the cosmic mind appear as a finished system of natural laws, requiring no gradual evolution or external alteration to achieve perfection. This profound interpretation suggested that the rational principles governing the universe existed eternally within the divine consciousness before they were ever manifested through the creative act that brought the physical cosmos into being. In his unfinished and spectral masterpiece, the Crisius, Plato further developed and deepened these themes through his narrative of ancient Athens and the lost, sunken civilization of Atlantis. In this dialogue, Athena takes the stage as a divine patroness who guided the prehistoric Athenians to establish an ideal society founded upon the twin pillars of wisdom and justice. It was said that the goddess selected the region of Attica for her special protection, specifically because the climate and geography of this land were naturally inclined to produce inhabitants capable of both philosophical contemplation and military virtue. This choice demonstrated how divine intelligence works through natural causality to achieve benevolent ends. The Crisias presented Athena's ancient Athenians as philosopher warriors who combined intellectual excellence with martial prowess, embodying the dual nature possessed by the goddess herself as the patroness of both wisdom and strategic warfare. These idealized ancestors had organized their society according to principles of justice and moderation that reflected divine wisdom, creating a community that served as a model for Plato's own political philosophy. The dialogue suggested that a correct understanding of Athena's nature could provide invaluable guidance, even in the world of that day, for contemporary efforts to establish just governance and enlightened educational systems. Plato's interpretation of Athena transcended the boundaries of mere cosmology and politics, encompassing the deep epistemological questions regarding the nature of knowledge and the human mind's process of grasping eternal truths, those profound inquiries into the very origins of knowing. The goddess's traditional association with craftsmanship provided the philosopher with rich metaphors to understand how intellectual activity transforms raw sensory experience into genuine knowledge. Just as skilled artisans employ tools and techniques to shape raw materials according to preconceived plans, so too does the human reason employ logical methods to discover the mathematical relationships and conceptual structures that lie beneath the surface of visible reality. The Academy, which Plato established in Athens around the year 387 before the Common Era, recognized the goddess as the patroness of the intellectual virtues that students were expected to cultivate, incorporating devotional practices honoring Athena alongside its philosophical curriculum. The location of the school, situated in a grove sacred to the hero Academos, reflected traditional Greek educational practices that fused religious worship with scientific instruction, while the Academy's dedication to mathematical and dialectical studies embodied Athena's association with systematic thought and rational analysis. Aristotle's approach to Athena as a philosophical symbol diverged significantly from the metaphysical soarings of his master, focusing instead on practical wisdom and the intellectual virtues necessary for effective action in the material world. The Aristotelian concept of phronesis, often translated as practical wisdom or prudence, aligned with startling closeness to traditional understandings of Athena's guidance of heroes and statesmen, emphasizing the application of rational analysis to specific situations requiring decision and action. In his Nicomachean Ethics, completed around the year 340 before the Common Era, Aristotle drew distinctions between different types of intellectual excellence. He defined practical wisdom as the virtue that enables individuals to make good and correct decisions regarding human affairs. This capacity was distinct from theoretical wisdom, which concerns itself with eternal truths and universal principles, and from technical skill, which focuses on the production of specific objects or results. Practical wisdom required an understanding of both universal moral principles and specific circumstances, enabling the wise person to determine appropriate actions in complex situations where abstract rules provided insufficient guidance. Athena's guidance of heroes, such as the wily Odysseus, provided Aristotle with concrete, lived examples of how practical wisdom operates under the most trying conditions. The counsel bestowed by the goddess upon those under her protection typically involved a careful analysis of available options, an evaluation of probable consequences, and the selection of strategies that balanced immediate necessities with long-term goals. This approach exemplified the process of deliberation, that state of deep reflection, which Aristotle identified as the core of practical wisdom, demonstrating how rational analysis could enhance natural human capacities without replacing personal responsibility for moral choice. The Aristotelian concept of the golden mean, that balanced position between the extremes of excess and deficiency, found a natural expression in Athena's approach to war and conflict resolution. The goddess consistently preferred strategies that achieved necessary objectives while minimizing unnecessary destruction, avoiding both the cowardice that refuses to confront legitimate threats and the recklessness that pursues victory at any cost. This balanced approach reflected the practical wisdom that recognizes courage as the middle path between cowardice and rashness, with Athena serving as a divine exemplar of the correctly calibrated response to challenging situations. Aristotle's Politics, written during the same period as the Ethics, expanded these insights into questions of governance and social organization, presenting Athena as the patroness of that type of rational deliberation, which enables communities to make good collective decisions. The goddess's protection of Athens during its classical period stood as proof of how divine wisdom could work through human institutions to promote prosperity and justice. Her association with craftsmanship demonstrated the importance of technical competence in the effective implementation of political decisions, while the Aristotelian analysis of constitutional forms identified the mixed constitution as the most stable and beneficial type of government, one that combined elements of democracy, aristocracy, and monarchy while maintaining the capacity for effective decision-making amidst balancing diverse social interests. Athena's guidance of Athens during its era of greatest achievement provided historical validation for this theoretical conclusion, suggesting that divine wisdom favoured political arrangements that incorporated multiple perspectives while maintaining a unified direction toward common goals. The Stoic philosophers of the Hellenistic period transformed these Platonic and Aristotelian insights into a comprehensive philosophical system that placed Athena at the very centre of their understanding of cosmic reason and human moral development. The Stoic concept of the logos, the rational principle governing the universe and providing the standard for human behaviour, overlapped closely with traditional representations of Athena as the embodiment of divine wisdom operating within the material world. Chrysippus of Soli, who led the Stoic school in the 3rd century before the Common Era, developed detailed interpretations of mythology that presented the gods as allegorical representations of natural forces and rational principles. Within this framework, Athena symbolized that divine reason which enables human beings to understand their place within the cosmic order and to align their actions with universal justice. The birth of the goddess from the head of Zeus represented the emergence of rational consciousness from the supreme principle of cosmic order. Her various activities demonstrated how reason could be applied to practical problems in ways that promoted both individual development and social harmony. The Stoic emphasis on emotional self-control and rational decision-making found a natural expression in Athena's traditional attributes, particularly in her preference for strategic thinking over impulsive action, and her ability to maintain calm judgment under pressure. Stoic teachers utilized examples from the goddess's mythological career to illustrate how a correct understanding of natural law could enable individuals to respond appropriately to challenging circumstances without being overwhelmed by fear, anger, or other destructive emotions. Epictetus, the Stoic philosopher of the 1st and 2nd centuries of the Common Era, developed these themes through his teachings on the discipline of desire, the discipline of action, and the discipline of assent. Athena's guidance of heroes offered concrete examples of how these disciplines could be applied in practice, demonstrating the importance of focusing on factors under one's control while learning to accept circumstances that cannot be changed. The goddess's strategic approach to problem-solving showed how rational analysis could identify effective courses of action even in seemingly hopeless situations. The Stoic concept of preferred indifference, meaning external goods that are naturally desirable but not vital for full human flourishing, found expression in the gifts Athena bestowed upon those under her protection. The goddess aided her champions not merely by removing obstacles or guaranteeing success, but by providing them with enhanced capabilities and favourable conditions, knowing that true success required personal effort and moral choice. This approach reflected the Stoic understanding that external advantages could support virtuous activity but could not replace the rational and moral development that constitutes true human goodness. The philosopher-emperor Marcus Aurelius, whose thoughts represented the zenith of Stoic thought, frequently invoked Athena as a model of the rational governance that should characterize both personal conduct and political leadership. The goddess's protection of Athens during its classical period demonstrated how divine wisdom could work through human institutions to promote justice and cultural achievement, while her association with craftsmanship revealed the importance of technical competence in effectively applying moral insights. The Neoplatonic philosophers of the later Roman era and the early Byzantine age would subsequently take these concepts to their metaphysical limits. These Neoplatonic thinkers, regarding Athena as the most consummate symbol of divine intelligence and the soul's ascent toward knowledge, developed the most sophisticated and systematic interpretations of her nature. Plotinus, the founder of Neoplatonism, who lived in the 3rd century of the Common Era, presented a comprehensive metaphysical system in which all reality could be traced back to that supreme and absolute principle known as the One, from which being, intellect, soul, and the material cosmos overflowed in cascading emanations. Within this hierarchical framework, Athena represented the divine intellect, the nous, that first and immediate emanation from the One, which contains within itself all possible forms and ideas in perfect unity, standing as the source of all reality that follows. The traditional association of the goddess with wisdom thus acquired a novel and profound resonance, becoming a symbol of the realm of eternal forms, those immutable archetypes that dictate the structure of the material world. Her miraculous birth from the head of Zeus was no longer interpreted merely as a fantastic mythological narrative, but was elevated to the status of a cosmic event representing the emergence of determined thought from the undifferentiated unity of the supreme principle. Her various activities, once seen as mere adventures, were reimagined as demonstrations of how intellectual principles could be applied within the chaotic realm of becoming and change. In the Enneads, compiled by Porphyry, the student of Plotinus, around the year 300 of the Common Era, detailed accounts were offered regarding how individual souls, through the rigours of philosophical contemplation and moral purification, might ascend to reunite with that sacred unity through the vehicle of the divine intellect. Athena's legendary guidance of heroes was transformed into a rich, metaphorical allegory for this spiritual odyssey. The goddess came to symbolize the higher aspects of the soul, those faculties capable of steering rational and moral development toward the ultimate truth. The various beasts, chimeras, and tribulations faced by the heroes under Athena's protection were understood to symbolize the spiritual impediments and earthly tethers that hinder the soul from achieving its natural union with the divine mind. The aid of the goddess served as a testament that, for those who seek it through appropriate philosophical practice, higher guidance is ever present. By the 5th century of the Common Era, Proclus, standing at the helm of the Academy in Athens, synthesized these insights into a comprehensive system of theurgy, a philosophy of ritual magic that combined rational analysis with sacramental practices designed to facilitate the soul's return to its divine source. Within this esoteric framework, Athena served simultaneously as an object of intense intellectual contemplation and as a potent divine force that could be invoked through precise ceremonial procedures. The goddess's ancient bond with craftsmanship provided the perfect model for understanding how theological practices, through the systematic application of symbolic and ritual techniques, could transmute the consciousness of the practitioner, crafting the soul into a vessel of light. The Neoplatonic interpretation of Athena's birth emphasized its significance as a symbol of the eternal generation of reason from the One, a process occurring outside the linear constraints of temporal sequencing, representing the fundamental structure of reality itself. The emergence of the goddess, fully formed and clad in the armour of war, demonstrated that the divine intellect possesses all possible knowledge and power in a state of flawless actuality, requiring no gradual development or acquisition of additional capacities. This interpretation provided a metaphysical foundation for philosophical practices aimed at awakening human consciousness to its participation in the eternal truth. Damasius, the final scholar to lead the Academy before the imperial decree of Emperor Justinian silenced its halls in the year 529, developed the most sophisticated Neoplatonic interpretations of this mythological material. He offered detailed analyses of how these traditional stories contained encoded metaphysical teachings regarding the nature of reality and the relationship of the soul to divine principles. His treatment of Athena emphasized her role as the divine principle that enables human minds to participate in eternal truth through the dual paths of rational contemplation and moral cultivation. This philosophical appropriation of Athena's symbolism left an indelible mark upon subsequent intellectual traditions, reverberating through Islamic philosophy, medieval scholasticism, and Renaissance humanism. Islamic philosophers such as Al-Farabi and Ibn Rushd wove these Neoplatonic interpretations of divine wisdom into their own systematic philosophies. Medieval Christian thinkers, in turn, found within Athena's traditional attributes useful analogies for understanding the complex relationship between divine grace and human reason. However, upon another front of history, the Roman conquest of Greece in the 2nd century before the Common Era initiated a complex process of religious and cultural syncretism, a blending of traditions that would fundamentally transform Athena's identity and worship practices across the Mediterranean world. As the Iron Legions of Rome marched across Greek soil, they encountered sophisticated religious traditions honed by centuries of unbroken practice, including the elaborate cult of Athena that had reached its zenith in classical Athens. The Roman commanders and administrators, rather than seeking to simply obliterate these foreign religious systems, recognized their potential value for legitimizing Roman rule and enriching their own cultural traditions through the selective adoption and adaptation of Greek elements. The identification of Athena with the Roman goddess Minerva represented far more than a simple equation of two deities from different pantheons assumed to be equivalent. Minerva had dwelt within the Roman religious consciousness since the earliest days of the city's development, yet her original nature and cultic functions differed vastly from those that would later be attributed to her through the lens of Greek influence. In the pre-Hellenistic era, Minerva served primarily as the divine patroness of the artisan and the craftsman, acting as the guardian of those engaged in textile production, metalworking, and other skilled trades requiring technical knowledge and manual dexterity. Her worship revolved around practical concerns regarding economic productivity and the maintenance of specialized skills essential for urban life. The earliest Roman references to Minerva appear in religious calendars and ritual prescriptions dating back to the 6th century before the Common Era, indicating that her cult was established long before significant Greek cultural influence reached the banks of the Tiber. These ancient sources identify Minerva as a member of the Capitoline Triad, alongside Jupiter and Juno, marking her as a figure of considerable importance within the official state religion. However, her functions in this early period were relatively narrow, focused intently on the protection of artisans and the encouragement of technical innovation, rather than the broad domains of wisdom, war, and civic guidance that would characterize her later, expanded role. The Temple of Minerva upon the Aventine Hill, dedicated around the year 263 before the Common Era, served as the primary centre for her worship throughout the Middle Republic period, acting as a lodestone for craftsmen from across the city seeking protection for their workshops and prosperity for their wares. The location of the temple, situated in a district heavily populated by artisans and small merchants, reflected Minerva's traditional constituency. Its architectural style incorporated elements from contemporary Greek temple design, signalling the growing Hellenistic influence on Roman religious practice, while the guild system that developed around the Aventine Temple created formal institutional structures linking the worship of the goddess to specific economic activities and professional identities. The Collegium Fabrum, representing carpenters and construction workers, maintained regular religious ceremonies honouring Minerva as their patron deity, while similar associations of metalworkers, weavers, and other skilled craftsmen established their own ritual practices and festival celebrations. These professional religious associations provided social cohesion and mutual support for their members, creating the institutional frameworks that would later facilitate the integration of Greek elements into the cult of Minerva. The transmutation of Minerva's identity accelerated dramatically during the 2nd and 1st centuries before the Common Era, as Rome's contact with Greek culture intensified through military campaigns, diplomatic relations, and the migration of Greek intellectuals to the Eternal City. Greek teachers, artists, and philosophers brought with them sophisticated theological and philosophical interpretations of Athena, which gradually influenced the way Romans understood their own goddess. This process of cultural synthesis operated through multiple channels, including official diplomatic exchanges, private educational relationships, and the importation of Greek art objects depicting Athena in ways that expanded Roman concepts of Minerva's nature and capabilities. The Roman upper classes proved particularly receptive to Greek intellectual traditions that presented Minerva not merely as a patron of technical skill, but as a goddess of wisdom and strategic thought. This expanded understanding resonated deeply with Roman aristocratic values, which emphasized education, rhetorical prowess, and strategic planning as fundamental qualifications for political leadership. The identification of Minerva with these intellectual virtues provided a divine sanction for the educational practices of the Roman elite, creating a religious justification for their claims to cultural superiority over less sophisticated populations. Marcus Tullius Cicero, through his philosophical writings and political orations, played a pivotal role in promoting this Hellenized version of Minerva, frequently invoking the goddess as a symbol of the wisdom and strategic foresight he deemed essential for effective governance. In his seminal work, De Natura Deorum, on the nature of the gods, completed around the year 45 before the Common Era, Cicero presented detailed arguments for understanding the gods not as anthropomorphic beings with human-like personalities and limitations, but as representations of natural forces and moral principles. Within this framework, Minerva embodied the rational intelligence that allows human beings to comprehend natural law and to organize society according to principles of justice and efficiency. Cicero's interpretation of Minerva drew heavily upon Stoic philosophical traditions that had developed sophisticated allegorical readings of traditional mythology, presenting the gods as symbols of cosmic principles rather than independent supernatural agents. This approach allowed educated Romans to embrace Greek philosophical insights while maintaining their traditional religious observances, avoiding a conflict between the old ways and the new learning. The association of Minerva with wisdom and strategic planning made her particularly suitable for such philosophical interpretations, as her traditional attributes aligned naturally with Stoic concepts of rational governance and moral development. The architectural programs initiated by Augustus during the early imperial period reflected and reinforced this expanded understanding of Minerva's significance within Roman culture. The Forum of Augustus, dedicated in the year 2 before the Common Era, housed the Temple of Mars Altar, which featured extensive sculptural decorations depicting Minerva, alongside other deities, associated with Roman military success and cultural achievement. In these sculptural programs, the goddess appeared not merely as a patron of crafts, but as a divine counselor whose wisdom guided the expansion of Rome. With the establishment of this peaceful order stretching across the Mediterranean world, efforts to exalt the goddess as a symbol of Rome's intellectual and cultural supremacy reached their zenith with the colossal Temple of Minerva, located in the Forum of Nerva and completed around the year 97 of the Common Era. This temple was not merely a structure of stone and marble, but a tangible testament to the fact that Rome had established its dominion over minds and souls as well as lands. The intricate and detailed sculptures adorning the temple's frieze juxtaposed scenes from Minerva's ancient mythology with representations of the 7 liberal arts and intellectual disciplines that formed the heart of Roman elite education. The edifice rose not only as a sacred centre where religious duties were fulfilled, but as a visual manifesto proclaiming the indissoluble bond between divine wisdom and human achievement, validating Rome's claims to cultural leadership in the eyes of the gods. The Quinquatrus festival, the most significant and exuberant religious celebration dedicated to Minerva in Roman practice, was celebrated annually between the 19th and 23rd days of March, when the fresh breath of spring embraced the eternal city. This festival blended elements from both traditional Roman craft celebrations and Greek intellectual traditions, hosting a comprehensive program of activities that honoured every corner of the goddess's expanding dominion. The festivities, spanning a full 5 days of jubilant celebration, constituted a ritual sequence that served to remind the populace that Minerva was far more than a mere patroness of the hammer and the loom. She was the celestial symbol of the universal mind itself. The festival was designed to mirror the ascension of the soul, beginning with the grounding reality of traditional craft exhibitions and ascending, day by day, toward the ethereal realms of rhetoric, poetry, and philosophical debate. A symbolic journey from the shaping of raw, unyielding matter to the sculpting of the invisible human spirit. The opening day of the Quinquatrus was dedicated entirely to honouring that ancient and deep-rooted role of Minerva as the guardian of artisans. Colourful and proud corteges composed of guild members from every corner of the city wound their way through the cobbled streets of Rome, bearing in their calloused hands the most exquisite examples of their labour. These processions were not merely parades but moving galleries where carpenters, who breathed life into dead timber, displayed complex wooden structures that demonstrated how a rough-hewn log could be transmuted into a masterpiece of art. Metalworkers walked alongside them, holding aloft bronze and silver vessels of such extraordinary beauty that they seemed to capture the very light of the sun, parading them like treasures dredged from the hoard of a dragon. The textile workers, guardians of the loom, unfurled fabrics woven from exotic materials gathered from the farthest reaches of the empire, displaying complex weaving techniques that fluttered in the wind like the banners of a conquering army. These ostentatious presentations served a dual purpose. They performed a sacred function by honouring the goddess who guided their hands, while simultaneously creating a vital economic opportunity for the artisans to attract patrons and establish their professional reputations. For in the Roman mind, the blessings of Minerva were manifest as clearly in the weight of gold coin as they were in the piety of the soul. As the festival progressed into its 2nd and 3rd days, the focus expanded to encompass educational activities, reflecting Minerva's profound dominion over intellectual development and scholarly achievement. Across the sprawling expanse of Rome, schools would suspend their ordinary lessons to participate in special ceremonies honouring the goddess as the supreme patroness of learning. During these days, the dusty, stale air of the classrooms was swept away by the infectious enthusiasm of the festivities. Students engaged in fierce competition with one another, striving to demonstrate their mastery of fundamental academic skills through contests of memory, recitation, and mathematical calculation. The teachers, too, received special acclaim during these rites. The most successful educators were crowned with wreaths fashioned from olive branches, that ancient symbol of wisdom, and were publicly honoured for their contributions to the cultivation of the Roman mind. The zenith of the festival arrived on the fourth day, marked by magnificent rhetorical competitions that drew participants and spectators from every province of the empire. These verbal tournaments created a unique stage for young Romans to display their mastery of the art of oratory, the ability to wield words with the lethality of a gladius, which was considered essential for any aspiring soul seeking a career in the treacherous arenas of law and politics. These contests followed formal rules derived from the storied traditions of Greek rhetoric, but applied them to subjects relevant to the gritty realities of Roman political and legal practice, creating a colossal synthesis between the theoretical methods of Greece and the pragmatic concerns of Rome. In this arena, where words flew like arrows and arguments were hurled like spears, the sharp, piercing intellect of Minerva echoed in every carefully constructed sentence. The final day of the Quinquatrus witnessed solemn religious ceremonies that emphasized Minerva's role in protecting the Roman state and guiding its relentless expansion across the known world. Military officers participated in arcane rituals seeking the goddess's blessing for upcoming campaigns, while civil officials honoured her as the wellspring of the wisdom required to govern the empire's diverse peoples and vast territories effectively. These rites cemented the link between divine favour and Roman success, providing a cloak of religious legitimacy for imperial policies and military actions. Minerva was no longer merely a humble artisan. She had become the invisible power guiding the hand that held the imperial sword and the hand that inscribed the imperial laws. The educational reforms promoted by various emperors during the 1st and 2nd centuries reflected the increasing importance of Minerva as the guardian of intellectual growth and cultural triumph. Schools and libraries established throughout the empire created institutional frameworks that transmitted Greek knowledge, while adapting it to suit Roman needs and values. Minerva's patronage of these institutions provided a divine sanction for the significant public expenditure required to sustain them, while simultaneously encouraging private endowments from wealthy citizens who sought divine favour by supporting intellectual pursuits. The profound and peculiar devotion of the Emperor Domitian to Minerva represented the most extreme example of identifying the imperial identity with the goddess and her attributes. Domitian claimed, with the fervour of a zealot, that Minerva appeared to him in his dreams and visions, serving as a personal counsellor who guided him in matters of state policy and military strategy. This alleged intimacy with the divine legitimised Domitian's authority, providing a religious justification for his often controversial decisions regarding both domestic governance and foreign wars. In the labyrinth of the emperor's mind, the whispers of Minerva and the survival of the state had become inextricably enshrined together. Domitian's construction of a new temple to Minerva upon the Palatine Hill demonstrated his commitment to promoting the worship of the goddess, while creating a physical symbol of his private communion with her. The temple's location within the imperial palace complex emphasized the intimate connection between divine wisdom and imperial power. The structure's elaborate decoration incorporated artistic elements, celebrating both Minerva's traditional attributes and Domitian's military and administrative achievements. The building served as a venue for private religious ceremonies that reinforced the emperor's claims of divine guidance and provided a setting for the intellectual activities he patronized as a display of his cultural sophistication. Adjoining Domitian's temple stood the Minerva Chalcidica, a grand hall that functioned as a nexus for literary and philosophical activities, attracting scholars and poets from the four corners of the empire. The emperor personally participated in the poetry competitions and philosophical debates held within this space, displaying his own intellectual talents and creating opportunities to prove that Roman cultural achievements were comparable to the glories of Greece. These activities served the ends of propaganda, presenting Domitian as a philosopher-emperor who combined effective rule with cultural patronage and intellectual cultivation. The capital in Aegon, established by Domitian in the year 86 of the Common Era, as a 4-year festival honouring Jupiter, Juno and Minerva, represented the most ambitious attempt to create a Roman equivalent to the great Greek festivals that celebrated intellectual and artistic achievement alongside athletic competition. The festival included contests in poetry, oratory, and music, attracting participants from across the Greek-speaking world and demonstrating Rome's appreciation for intellectual excellence. The festival's emphasis on Minerva's role as the patroness of intellectual rivalry reflected the transformation of her identity from a primarily craft-oriented goddess into a comprehensive symbol of wisdom and high culture. The prizes awarded to successful competitors included not only monetary rewards, but also crowns of olive leaves, explicitly linking the Roman festival to Greek traditions and asserting Rome's cultural equality with its predecessors. The development of Roman legal education during the imperial period created new opportunities to invoke Minerva's patronage in a context that fused intellectual rigour with practical application. Law schools throughout the empire honoured the goddess as the guardian of the analytical thinking and rhetorical skills essential for legal practice. Legal scholars dedicated their treatises to her, acknowledging her as the source of the wisdom necessary to comprehend complex juridical principles. This relationship between Minerva and the study of law reinforced the claim that Rome had achieved a cultural synthesis, merging Greek intellectual sophistication with practical Roman administrative genius. The association of the goddess with military engineering and siege warfare represented another domain where Roman practice expanded upon traditional Greek concepts of Athena's role. Roman military engineers prayed for Minerva's protection for their innovative approaches to fortification, siege engines, and logistical planning, which enabled successful campaigns across diverse geographical and climatic conditions. The goddess's patronage of these technical military arts reflected Rome's emphasis on systematic planning and technological innovation for military success, distinguishing their approach from Greek traditions that often prioritized individual heroism and tactical brilliance. The Trajan column, constructed between the years 107 and 113, featured sculptural elements depicting Minerva guiding Roman military engineers in the construction of bridges, roads, and siege structures during the Dacian campaigns. These artistic representations presented the goddess not as a warrior, participating directly in the bloody fray, but as the divine intelligence that made Rome's technical superiority and strategic planning possible. The column's detailed depictions of engineering activities provided a visual record of Roman military capabilities, while crediting divine wisdom for the innovative solutions brought to bear against logistical challenges. The spread of Minerva's worship throughout the Roman provinces created opportunities for syncretism, the fusion of beliefs, with local deities and religious traditions possessing similar attributes or functions. In Gaul, Minerva became associated with Celtic goddesses who served as patrons of craftsmanship and tribal wisdom, creating hybrid religious practices that incorporated Roman theological concepts while preserving local cultural elements. Similar processes occurred in Britain, Germania, and other frontier regions where Roman military and civil settlements encountered indigenous populations with their own sophisticated religious traditions. The Roman Celtic goddess Sulis Minerva, worshipped at the thermal springs in Bath, England, represented one of the most successful examples of such religious synthesis. The healing properties of the natural hot springs had attracted Celtic religious interest long before the Roman conquest, yet the identification of the local deity with Minerva created new interpretive frameworks that combined traditional healing practices with Roman concepts of divine wisdom and technical innovation. The elaborate temple complex that developed at Bath during the 1st and 2nd centuries attracted visitors from across Britain and continental Europe, all seeking both physical healing and spiritual guidance from this syncretic goddess. In those sacred pools where steam rose like the breath of the earth to mingle with the mists of Albion, the ancient spirit of Sulis intertwined with the rational intellect of Minerva, dispensing hope to the afflicted. Thus, the transformation of Athena into Minerva represented a complex process of cultural adaptation that preserved the fundamental elements of Greek religious tradition while altering them to serve the political, social, and cultural needs of Rome. This process wove not only the name of the goddess but her very essence into the fabric of the empire, transforming her into an eternal monument of wisdom that would endure as long as stone stood upon stone. Following the cataclysmic collapse of the Roman Empire through those long and twilight centuries that history has cloaked in the title of the Dark Ages, one might have been forgiven for presuming that the torch of Athena had finally been extinguished, swallowed by the encroaching shadows. Yet divine wisdom possesses an eldritch and resilient capacity to rise from its own ashes, like a phoenix of the mind, whenever the human intellect cries out for illumination. This profound resurgence did not merely restore the old ways, it forged a new model of religious and cultural synthesis that would fundamentally alter how divine wisdom was perceived across the Mediterranean world, creating a legacy that would continue to haunt and inspire Western civilization long after the marble columns of Rome had crumbled into dust. The endurance of Athena's image and her potent symbolism within Western art, literature, and political iconography for thousands of years stands as the most tangible proof of the extraordinary resistance that classical mythological concepts display in the face of radical cultural transformation. From the reawakening of classical learning during the Renaissance to the turbulent artistic and political movements of the modern era, the representation of Athena as the corporeal manifestation of wisdom, strategic warfare, and civilized governance provided a powerful symbolic language for generation after generation to articulate their highest ideals regarding knowledge, justice, and rational authority. This unbroken chain of reinterpretation and adaptation reflected both the irresistible allure of the goddess's fundamental attributes and the fluid flexibility of mythological symbols to mold themselves to shifting cultural values and political landscapes. In the dawning light of the Renaissance, which began to illuminate Italy during the 14th and 15th centuries, humanist scholars and visionary artists embarked on a quest to rediscover the past, unearthing classical texts and artistic representations that had been largely forgotten or neglected during the medieval epoch, as if digging for spiritual gold beneath the soil of history. The recovery of the works of Plato, Aristotle, Cicero, and other ancient sages, who had penned comprehensive treatises on the philosophical significance of Athena, offered the intellectuals of the Renaissance sophisticated interpretive frameworks, allowing them to comprehend the goddess not merely as a pagan idol, but as a timeless symbol of divine wisdom operating within the sphere of human affairs. This scholarly awakening occurred in tandem with the development of new artistic techniques and systems of patronage that allowed for visual representations of classical themes and mythological subjects on a scale of grandeur never before seen. The mesmerizing painting titled Pallas and the Centaur, executed by the master Sandro Botticelli around the year 1482, stands as a perfect exemplar of the Renaissance approach to Athena's symbolism. In this masterpiece, the goddess is presented as a figure of absolute civilizing authority, bringing to heel the centaur, a creature half man and half horse, representing the untamed bestial passions of the wild. The composition of the tableau emphasizes the goddess's calm dignity and intellectual superiority over brute force. She does not strike the beast, but rather grasps the centaur by his hair in a gesture that is devoid of violence yet indicative of total, commanding control. Botticelli's vision reflected the contemporary humanist values that championed the importance of rational governance and the refinement that comes from education to forge societies that are stable, prosperous, and free from the ravages of chaos. In the painting, the goddess appears clad in her traditional armour and helm, yet the brush of Botticelli foregrounded the decorative and aesthetic aspects of her panoply, rather than its martial utility, transforming the symbols of war into elegant artistic elements that implied the triumph of wisdom over disorder. The olive branches woven into the composition reinforced that ancient unbreakable bond between Athena and the peaceful resolution of conflicts, while the Mediterranean landscape stretching into the background tethered this mythological scene to the very real political anxieties of contemporary Italy, where rival city-states struggled to maintain stability amidst constant intrigue. A different yet equally profound interpretation was offered by Andrea Mantegna in his work completed in the year 1502 titled Minerva Expelling the Vices from the Garden of Virtue. This painting presented a far more elaborate and allegorical program, utilizing the image of Athena to address the complex moral and political questions of Renaissance court culture. The canvas depicts Minerva leading a fierce assault against the personified forms of evil. Grotesque representations of ignorance, ingratitude, and avarice, driving them out so that virtuous figures might find sanctuary within a fortified garden, representing the protection that true wisdom offers against moral corruption. Mantegna's intricate iconographic scheme demonstrated how classical mythology could retain its connection to ancient sources while being adapted to serve the didactic and moralizing purposes of a new age. The architectural revival of classical forms during the Renaissance further integrated the symbols of Athena into the very stones of buildings that served both aesthetic and ideological functions. The facade of the ducal palace in Urbino, completed under the patronage of Duke Federico da Montefeltro around the year 1480, featured stone reliefs depicting Minerva alongside other classical deities and allegorical figures representing the liberal arts. These decorative programs served to present the owner of the palace as a wise and enlightened ruler, transforming his court into a centre of intellectual achievement and cultural refinement comparable to the Athens of Pericles. Throughout the 16th century, the development of emblem books created systematic visual dictionaries for the educated elites of Europe, encoding the symbolic meanings associated with the image of Athena. The Emblemata of Andrea Alciato, first published in the year 1531, contained numerous entries explaining how the various attributes associated with Athena could be interpreted as moral and political lessons suitable for contemporary conditions. The owl, with its piercing gaze, represented the capacity to perceive the truth and maintain vigilance even in the most trying and darkened circumstances, while the olive branch symbolized the preference for resolving disputes through the avenues of peace rather than the devastation of military conquest. These traditions of the emblem profoundly influenced the decorative programs of grand architectural projects across Europe, as architects and patrons sought to display their classical learning while simultaneously conveying sophisticated political messages through complex symbolic systems. During the reign of Louis XIV, known to history as the Sun King, the magnificent Palace of Versailles incorporated countless references to Minerva within its painted ceilings and sculptural decorations, presenting the French monarchy as the true heir to the classical traditions of wise governance and cultural patronage. The War Salon at Versailles housed an elaborate ceiling painting by Charles Lebrun depicting the military victories of Louis XIV, in which Minerva appears as a divine counsellor, guiding French strategic planning and guaranteeing the king's triumph over his enemies. The presence of the goddess in this context served a manifold propaganda purpose. It suggested that French military success stemmed from superior intellect and planning rather than mere brute force, while simultaneously linking the reign of Louis to the classical precedents of philosopher kings who united military prowess with intellectual achievement. The political upheavals of the 18th century created entirely new contexts for invoking the symbolism of Athena, as revolutionary movements in Europe and America looked to classical precedents of democratic governance and rational political organization to legitimize their challenges to established authority. The American Revolution drew heavily upon classical republican traditions that presented Athens as a model for citizen participation in government, while the French Revolution adopted a much more explicit and radical image of Athena in its official symbolism and ceremonial practices. The Great Seal of the United States, adopted in the year 1782, incorporated the owl as a symbol of the wisdom that would guide the development of the new nation. The olive branch, clutched firmly in the talons of the eagle, represented a national preference for the peaceful resolution of international disputes. The designers of the seal drew upon the traditions of the emblem books to define the meanings of these symbols, yet they adapted them to serve specifically American political goals, emphasizing rational governance and the rejection of arbitrary royal authority. The adoption of Minerva as an official symbol by the French revolutionary government reflected a far more dramatic appropriation of the classical image for radical political ends. The goddess appeared on coins, official documents, and public monuments as a representation of the rational principles that the revolutionaries claimed would replace the superstitions and arbitrary authority associated with the Ancien Regime. The paintings and festival designs of Jacques-Louis David utilized Minerva alongside other classical figures to create comprehensive visual programs that presented the revolution as the restoration of ancient republican virtues. The cult of reason, promoted during the most radical phase of the French Revolution, explicitly identified Minerva with the rational principles the revolutionaries sought to establish as the foundation of a new social order. In churches that had been transformed into temples of reason, festivals were held featuring actresses portraying Minerva, revered by crowds dressed in classical costumes, creating theatrical spectacles that merged religious ceremony with political propaganda. These events demonstrated both the power of classical symbolism to ignite public enthusiasm and the dangers inherent in attempting to replace traditional religious practices with artificial alternatives. The 19th century witnessed an unprecedented expansion in the archaeological investigation of ancient sites, providing new material evidence for understanding historical worship practices and artistic representations of Athena that had previously been known only through literary sources. The systematic excavation of the Athenian Acropolis, which began in the 1830s following the removal of Ottoman-era structures, revealed architectural and sculptural remains that transformed scholarly understanding of classical Greek religious practices, while simultaneously serving as a wellspring of inspiration for contemporary artistic and political movements. The discovery and subsequent removal of the Parthenon sculptures by Lord Elgin between the years 1801 and 1812 sparked intense debates regarding the ownership of cultural artefacts, even as it made these masterpieces of classical art accessible to European audiences who had previously known them only through written descriptions. The arrival of the Elgin marbles in London ignited discussions about cultural heritage and imperial responsibility that continue to influence museum practices and international cultural politics to this day. The sculptures themselves offered artists and scholars unprecedented opportunities to study classical Greek artistic techniques and iconographic programs. The detailed documentation of the Parthenon's sculptural decoration revealed the sophistication of the building's original design program, which integrated architectural, sculptural, and symbolic elements into a comprehensive statement regarding Athena's relationship to Athenian political and cultural success. The metopes depicting the battles between the Greeks and various enemies, the frieze illustrating the Panathenaic procession, and the pediment sculptures representing the birth of Athena and her contest with Poseidon provided visual evidence for religious practices and mythological traditions that complemented and at times contradicted the literary sources. The excavations conducted by Heinrich Schliemann at Troy in the 1870s and 1880s, though methodologically flawed by modern standards, captured the public imagination and demonstrated the potential of archaeological inquiry to illuminate the historical contexts underlying mythological narratives. Schliemann's claims to have discovered the very city described in the Homeric epics, where Athena played such a vital role in the Greek victory, created entirely new possibilities for understanding the relationship between mythological traditions and historical events. This process of rediscovery, fed by the twin streams of classical literary sources and the whispering truths unearthed by contemporary archaeological spades, inspired a renaissance of art and literature that revealed just how profoundly the legacy of Athena was being reshaped within the crucible of the modern world. In the years following 1930, when the American School of Classical Studies undertook the monumental task of excavating the Athenian agora, they brought the ancient beating heart of the city back into the light of day. These excavations did far more than merely expose stone and soil. They illuminated the intricate living tapestry of daily existence in classical Athens. The physical evidence unearthed from the dark earth proved that the worship of Athena was not confined to the dim, incense-filled corridors of temples, but was woven inextricably into the very centre of civil and commercial life, pulsing through the most vibrant veins of the city. The discovery of the Stoa of Attalos, with its vast colonnaded galleries, the Bouleuterion where the council convened, and the remnants of countless smaller shrines and bustling workshops, demonstrated how religious obligations permeated every facet of Athenian urban existence. This complex landscape, where the sacred and the mundane were hopelessly and beautifully intertwined, stood as testament to the comprehensive nature of the goddess's dominion over the community. She was present in the rhythmic strike of the artisan's hammer, just as surely as she was in the heated debates of the assembly. These archaeological revelations sent shockwaves not only through the dusty halls of historians, but also through the vibrant art and architectural movements of Europe and America. Designers and architects, armed with this profound scientific knowledge of ancient precedents, sought to weave authentic classical elements into their contemporary projects, yearning to capture a fragment of that ancient majesty. The Greek revival movement in architecture drew heavily upon this wellspring of archaeological evidence to create edifices that reproduced classical proportions and decorative systems with a fidelity never before seen, yet they did not neglect to adapt these ancient forms to serve the functional requirements of the modern age. The sculptural decoration of the United States Capitol building, completed in the middle years of the 19th century, embodied countless allusions to Minerva, presenting the goddess as the divine patroness of American democratic institutions and cultural achievement. The imposing statue of Freedom, crafted by Thomas Crawford to crown the dome of the Capitol, wore a helmet adorned with stars and the head of an eagle, a fusion of classical and American symbolism that invoked the martial and protective spirit of the goddess. Within the rotunda of the Capitol, the frescoes of Constantino Brumidi depicted Minerva in conversation with George Washington and other founding fathers, placing her within majestic allegorical scenes that link the political development of the American Republic directly to the grandeur of classical precedents. Yet, as the 19th century waned and the dawn of the 20th century broke, the blossoming of feminist movements created entirely new interpretive frameworks for understanding the grey-eyed goddess. This fresh perspective grappled with the complex and often contradictory facets of her mythological character, striving to reconcile her role as a potent female deity with her service to a patriarchal order. Early feminist scholars beheld in Athena a figure who embodied intellectual and military capabilities that challenged traditional assumptions about female nature and social roles. Yet, they were forced to acknowledge her troubled relationship with patriarchal authority and the adversarial stance she frequently adopted toward other female figures in the mythological narratives. The seminal work of Elizabeth Cady Stanton, The Woman's Bible, published in the final years of the 19th century, contained commentaries on classical mythology that presented Athena as proof of the ancient recognition of feminine wisdom and capability. However, Stanton did not shy away from critiquing the goddess's absolute subservience to Zeus and her role in punishing other women who dared to defy male authority. Stanton's analysis reflected the tension inherent in attempting to reclaim classical female figures as positive role models while acknowledging how deeply they were embedded within patriarchal mythological systems that often reinforced, rather than questioned, gender hierarchies. The suffrage movement adopted images of Athena with a selective fastidiousness. They chose to highlight her wisdom and strategic brilliance, while relegating her military aspects and her conflicts with other women to the shadows.